The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. The scientists of the United Federation of Planets spent centuries mapping those principles, codifying them, building a civilization that stretched across 1,000 worlds. They believed they had seen everything: warp-capable species, telepathic beings, shapeshifters, even omnipotent entities like Q who bent reality for amusement. But what happens when something arrives that doesn't just bend the rules? It operates by an entirely different set. The year was 3189, and the galaxy was still healing. 40 years had passed since the burn, the cataclysmic event that caused nearly all dilithium in the galaxy to simultaneously detonate, destroying most warp-capable vessels in a single, horrifying instant. The United Federation of Planets, once spanning hundreds of worlds, had fractured into isolated pockets. The Emerald Chain, a ruthless mercantile alliance, had filled the power vacuum with brutality and avarice. And in the center of it all, the USS Discovery, a ship from the past, worked tirelessly to reunite what remained of Starfleet's ideals. Captain Michael Burnham stood on Discovery's bridge, reviewing stellar cartography data with Commander Rayner. They were investigating unusual subspace fluctuations near the Varabin Nebula, readings that didn't match any known phenomenon. Not warp signatures. Not transporters. Not even the residual echoes of dilithium detonations that still haunted sensors across the galaxy. It's almost like Science Officer Adira Tal frowned at their console. Like space itself is tearing. Tearing. Burnham stepped closer. Elaborate. The dimensional membrane is destabilizing. Whatever's causing this, it's not from our universe. Adira's fingers flew across the holographic interface. Captain, if I'm reading this correctly, something's trying to punch through from another reality. Before Burnham could respond, the view screen erupted with light. A rupture appeared in space, not an elegant wormhole or controlled subspace rift, but a violent, ragged wound in reality itself. Crimson and gold energy crackled along its edges, and through it came something impossible. 12 figures emerged, floating in the void of space as if gravity were merely a suggestion. A man in red and gold armor, repulsor systems glowing. A super soldier in starred stripes carrying a vibranium shield. A towering figure wreathed in lightning, hammer raised. A green giant, impossibly massive. A woman with glowing hands radiating scarlet energy. An android phasing between densities. A man in a crimson cloak, mystical symbols spinning around his fingers. A young man in red and blue, somehow standing on nothing. A warrior in black armor with energy claws extended. A woman blazing with photonic energy. 2 human operatives with advanced weapons. The Avengers had arrived. Red alert. Burnham's voice cut through the stunned silence. Shields up. Helm, evasive pattern Beta 7. Discovery's shield snapped into place as the ship banked hard. On the view screen, the armored figure, Iron Man, though Burnham had no way of knowing that, raised one hand. His helmet's heads-up display scanned the starship before him, analyzing its hull composition, energy signatures, and propulsion systems. Jarvis, analysis, Tony Stark muttered inside his armor. Unknown vessel configuration, sir. Technology is peculiar. Matter-antimatter propulsion systems, coherent nadion particle weapons, and what appears to be a graviton-based deflector array. No match for any Earth-based design in our databases. That's because we're not in Kansas anymore. Tony's repulsors charged. Or Earth. Or our dimension, apparently. Captain America's voice cut through their shared comm system, calm despite the impossible situation. Avengers, maintain formation. We don't know if this ship is hostile or connected to the temporal anomaly. But we came here for a reason, something in this universe is threatening ours. Thor spun Stormbreaker, electricity arcing between his fingers. I sense great power here, Rogers. These people command forces beyond simple technology. Magic? Doctor Strange floated forward, his hands weaving protective wards. The eye of Agamotto pulsed beneath his robes. No. Different. This reality's dimensional structure is fundamentally distinct from ours. The rules have changed. On Discovery's bridge, every console screamed warnings. Captain, they're scanning us. Lieutenant Christopher reported from Tactical. Our shields are holding, but whatever technology they're using, it's penetrating our defenses like they're not even there. Hail them, Burnham ordered. Standard first contact protocols. Channel open. Burnham stepped forward, her voice steady despite the astronomical impossibility floating on her view screen. Unknown vessels and individuals. I am Captain Michael Burnham of the Federation starship Discovery. You have entered Federation space through what appears to be an unauthorized dimensional incursion. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. For a moment, silence. Then Iron Man's external speakers activated, his voice carrying across the void and through Discovery's communication systems. Federation. Sorry, but we didn't exactly RSVP for this trip. I'm Tony Stark, and these are the Avengers. We're here because our universe detected a temporal weapon or entity originating from your reality, something capable of collapsing the entire multiverse. So here's how this is going to work. You're going to tell us everything you know about temporal anomalies in this sector, and we're going to neutralize the threat. Cooperate, and nobody gets hurt. Burnham's jaw tightened. Mr. Stark, I don't know what kind of authority you claim in your universe, but in ours, you don't make demands of Starfleet vessels. We're willing to discuss your concerns through proper diplomatic channels. Diplomatic channels. Tony's laugh was bitter. Lady, we watched half the universe turn to dust because we weren't fast enough. We don't do proper channels when the multiverse is at stake. Doctor Strange, confirm the readings. Strange's astral form flickered, projecting outward as he analyzed the surrounding space with senses that made Discovery's sensors look primitive. The temporal distortion is definitely here. Somewhere in this galaxy, something is creating ripples that extend backwards and forwards through time across dimensional barriers. If left unchecked. He paused, his expression grave. The damage will be irreparable. Commander Rayner leaned toward Burnham. Captain, recommend we stand down and negotiate. We're outnumbered, and sensors can't even classify half of what we're seeing. That lightning-wielding individual is generating more energy than our entire warp core. I'm aware, Commander. Burnham's mind raced. The Federation had spent 40 years recovering from the burn, learning painful lessons about humility and cooperation. But these people, whoever they were, weren't asking for cooperation. They were demanding submission. She touched her comm badge. Burnham to Federation headquarters. We have a situation. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. The standoff hung in the balance, two philosophies of heroism separated by a dimensional barrier neither fully understood. The Avengers had come to save the multiverse. The Federation existed to explore and unite. Neither would back down. And somewhere in the shattered galaxy, the real threat waited, feeding on the temporal chaos the burn had left behind. Federation headquarters materialized on Discovery's view screen, or rather, what passed for headquarters in the 32nd century. Admiral Charles Vance appeared, his expression already hardening as he assessed the tactical display showing 12 unidentified hostiles surrounding one of Starfleet's most valuable vessels. Captain Burnham, report. Admiral, we have a first contact situation. 12 individuals claiming to be from another universe, armed with technology and abilities we can't classify. They're demanding information about temporal anomalies and threatening to act unilaterally if we don't comply. Vance's eyes narrowed. Threatening a Starfleet vessel is an act of war. Have they made any overtly hostile moves? Negative, sir. But their posture is aggressive, and they're not responding to diplomatic protocols. On the Avengers side of the confrontation, tensions were rising. "We're wasting time," Captain Marvel said, her body blazing with photonic energy. "Every second we spend talking, that temporal weapon gets stronger. I can feel it, something out there is pulling at the fabric of space-time." "Carol's right," Natasha Romanoff observed, her widow's bite gauntlets armed. "But charging in blind is how we lost last time. We need intel." Bruce Banner, maintaining human form with visible effort, studied the starship through borrowed binoculars from Hawkeye. "That ship, it's beautiful, actually. Look at the way they've integrated their propulsion systems. The engineering is elegant, efficient. These people aren't primitives." "Neither were the Chitauri," Clint Barton countered, arrow knocked. "And they still invaded New York." "We're not the Chitauri," came a new voice through Discovery's communications array. Every head on the Avengers side turned to Dr. Strange, who had extended his astral projection to create a three-way communication channel between the Avengers, Discovery, and Federation headquarters. His spectral form flickered between all three locations simultaneously, a feat that made Adira's eyes widen. "How is he?" the science officer began. Later, Burnham interrupted. "Dr. Strange, I presume. Former Sorcerer Supreme, current Master of the Mystic Arts, and increasingly concerned mediator." Strange's astral form solidified slightly. "Admiral Vance, Captain Burnham, my colleagues are acting with the best intentions but the worst approach. In our universe, we've faced extinction-level threats that required immediate, overwhelming response. Diplomacy came second to survival. In our universe," Vance replied coldly, "we've learned that overwhelming response tends to create more problems than it solves. The burn destroyed our civilization because someone tried to weaponize dilithium. We rebuilt on cooperation, not intimidation." Strange inclined his head. "A fair point. But the temporal anomaly we've detected isn't theoretical. It's real, it's growing, and if our calculations are correct, it's already affected your timeline in ways you haven't recognized." That got Burnham's attention. "Explain." "The burn," Strange said carefully. "Tell me, did your scientists ever fully explain why dilithium simultaneously detonated across the entire galaxy? The quantum mechanics behind such an event should be impossible unless something was manipulating time itself." Silence fell on Discovery's bridge. Adira's voice was barely a whisper. We know it originated from the Quegian. A Kelpian child named Sukal whose unique physiology created a subspace scream. But the propagation mechanism was never fully understood. Captain, the speed at which it spread, faster than subspace communication should allow. Temporal propagation, Strange finished. Not just across space, but backwards and forwards through time simultaneously. The burn didn't just happen in your present. It created echoes through your past and future, weak enough that you couldn't detect them, but strong enough to destabilize dimensional barriers. That's impossible, Commander Rayner said flatly. So is a man who turns into a green giant, Tony Stark interjected, his armor's scanners still analyzing Discovery. Or a god who summons lightning. Or me, standing in vacuum without a spaceship. Your impossible just has different parameters than ours. Thor stepped forward, Stormbreaker gleaming. I am Thor Odinson, son of Odin, king of Asgard. I have walked the 9 realms and fought beside the Avengers against darkness you cannot imagine. We do not come as conquerors, but as protectors. Yet we will not be denied. King of Asgard. Lieutenant Commander Detmer whispered. Captain, he's claiming to be royalty. And generating enough electromagnetic energy to power a small planet, Christopher added from tactical. His weapon is reading as. I don't even know what this is. It's not matter, not pure energy. Something in between. Black Panther's voice joined the conversation, measured and diplomatic. Captain Burnham, I am Chala, King of Wakanda. In our world, I lead a nation that values wisdom over warfare, but understands that sometimes strength must back principle. We have faced gods, aliens, and cosmic tyrants. We have died and returned. We have seen the universe itself hang in the balance. When Doctor Strange tells us the multiverse is at risk, we listen. Vance's expression hadn't softened. Mr. Chala, in our world, we've faced similar threats. The Borg collective that sought to assimilate all life. The Dominion that waged war across the Alpha Quadrant. Species that considered themselves gods. We survived by maintaining our principles even when threatened with extinction. The Prime Directive exists because interference, no matter how well-intentioned, causes catastrophic harm. The Prime Directive, Captain America said, his voice carrying that unmistakable quality that made people listen. What is it, exactly? Burnham answered. Starfleet General Order 1, no identification of self or mission, no interference with the social development of alien civilizations, no references to space or other worlds. It's the foundation of Federation philosophy. We explore, we study, we offer aid when requested, but we never impose our will on others. Steve Rogers was quiet for a moment. That's actually beautiful. And completely unworkable when facing existential threats. It's worked for 400 years, Burnham shot back. Has it? Scarlet Witch's voice was soft but carried an edge of grief. Doctor Strange showed us what happened here. Your burn. Your scattered Federation. Your people struggling to survive. Where was your Prime Directive when your civilization fell? The words hit like a phaser blast. Wanda Maximoff floated closer to Discovery, her chaos magic swirling around her fingers in patterns that made Discovery's sensors scream contradictory data. I've lost everything. My brother. My home. The man I loved. I watched half the universe disappear, and I was powerless to stop it. So when we have the chance to prevent another catastrophe, even in a universe not our own, I won't stand aside. Nobody's asking you to stand aside, Burnham said, her voice sharp. We're asking you to work with us. Share your data, coordinate with our scientists, follow proper protocols. While your bureaucracy decides if the threat is real. Tony interrupted. Lady, by the time your committees finish deliberating, the multiverse will be a smoking crater. Jarvis, show them what we're seeing. Iron Man's armor projected a holographic display, not Federation technology, but something that translated well enough. Temporal readings, dimensional stress fractures, probability matrices that showed reality itself unraveling. The data was irrefutable. And it was terrifying. Adira studied the projections, their hands trembling. Captain, if this is accurate, we have maybe 72 hours before the dimensional barriers collapse completely. Every universe would bleed into every other universe. Infinite realities, infinite matter, all occupying the same space simultaneously. Total protonic reversal, Peter Parker quipped nervously. Like Ghostbusters, but multiversal scale. Who? Detmer asked. Never mind. Spider-Man's lenses widened as he studied Discovery. Wait, is that ship alive? I'm picking up biological signatures integrated with the hull structure. You can sense that? Burnham asked, startled. Spider sense. It's complicated. Peter waved a hand. Point is, your ship is amazing, and I really don't want to fight you. Can we please just work together? Vision phased forward, his density shifting to pure energy and back. Captain Burnham, I am Vision. I was created by a stone of infinite power, destroyed protecting my friends, and rebuilt through means I still don't fully understand. I say this to establish credibility, we are not your enemies. But we are also not bound by your laws. The survival of all realities supersedes any single civilization's regulations. That's not your decision to make, Vance said firmly. Then whose is it? Captain America asked. Because from where I'm standing, we're the ones who came here to stop it. We're the ones with the power to act. And we're the ones who won't let bureaucracy paralyze us while existence itself burns. The gauntlet was thrown. Burnham looked at Vance, then at her crew, then at the impossible warriors floating outside her ship. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that the Federation way, the diplomatic way, was the right path. But she'd also seen what happened when dogma trumped adaptation. The burn had taught that lesson brutally. "Admiral," she said slowly. "Request permission to establish a joint task force. Limited information sharing, supervised cooperation, with Starfleet oversight." "Denied," Vance said immediately. "Captain, you're allowing them to dictate terms through intimidation." "Sir, with respect, they could have attacked the moment they arrived. They didn't. They're talking. That's something." Tony's helmet retracted, revealing a face lined with exhaustion and determination. "Captain's smart. Admiral's cautious. Both valid positions. But here's the reality. We're going to investigate this threat with or without your permission. We'd prefer with, because your people know this universe and we don't. But make no mistake, we're not asking for permission. We're offering partnership." Thor's eyes blazed with lightning. "Choose quickly. I sense something stirring in the darkness between stars. Something that feeds on temporal chaos. And it knows we're here." The Verabin Nebula hung in space like a wound, a churning mass of ionized gas and subspace distortions that had baffled Federation scientists for decades. Before the burn, it had been a navigational hazard. After the burn, it became something worse, a graveyard for ships whose dilithium had detonated mid-warp, their shattered hulls drifting in the nebula's electromagnetic storms like metal tombstones. Now, as Discovery approached with the Avengers in formation around it, the nebula pulsed with a rhythm that shouldn't exist. "It's breathing," Adira said, their voice tight. "Captain, the subspace distortions are following a pattern. Contraction, expansion, contraction. Like a heartbeat." Dr. Strange floated beside Discovery's hull, his astral form extended far beyond normal human limits. The eye of Agamotto blazed beneath his robes as he examined the nebula with senses that transcended conventional physics. What he saw made his expression grave. "It's not breathing," he corrected through the open comm channel. "It's feeding." Inside Discovery's conference room, an uneasy alliance had formed. Burnham had convinced Admiral Vance to allow limited cooperation, emphasis on limited. Now she sat across from Captain America, Iron Man, and Black Panther, with Commander Raynor and Adira flanking her. The rest of the Avengers maintained position outside, ready to respond if diplomacy failed. "Feeding on what?" Burnham asked. Strange holographic projection appeared in the center of the conference table, courtesy of Tony's technology interfaced with Federation holo-emitters. "Temporal energy. Specifically, the kind released when dilithium detonates across time and space simultaneously. The burn wasn't just a catastrophe, it was a feast." Tony pulled up his own holographic display, overlaying it with Federation sensor data. "Jarvis has been analyzing your database on the burn. The official explanation is that Sukal's genetic mutation created a subspace feedback loop. But look at the energy distribution pattern." He highlighted specific areas. "It's not random. Something was guiding it, amplifying it, spreading it across your galaxy like roots seeking water. You're suggesting the burn was intentional?" Raynor's voice was dangerous. "Billions died." "Not intentional," Chala said carefully. "Opportunistic. A predator that sensed prey." Sukal's scream created the initial rupture, but something else, something existing outside normal spacetime, used that rupture to feed on the temporal energy released when dilithium exploded across multiple time periods simultaneously. Burnham felt cold. What kind of entity could do that? In our universe? Steve Rogers leaned forward, his blue eyes serious. We've faced cosmic threats. Thanos collected 6 Infinity Stones that controlled fundamental aspects of reality. Dormammu existed outside time itself, consuming dimensions. This feels similar. Something that treats your timeline like a buffet. And you think it's still here, Burnham said. Still feeding. Not think. No. Doctor Strange's image flickered as he divided his attention between the conversation and his mystical examination of the nebula. The burn created weak points in your timeline, moments where past, present, and future blur together. This entity is using those weak points to feed continuously. Every time someone uses a warp drive, every time dilithium reacts, it creates tiny temporal ripples. Individually harmless. Collectively. He paused. It's sustaining something that should be impossible. Adira's hands trembled as they worked through the implications. If what you're saying is true, the entity has been feeding for 40 years. Growing stronger. And if it's also affecting dimensional barriers, then it's not just your universe at risk, Tony finished. It's already started bleeding into ours. That's how we detected it. Reality itself is starting to thin between dimensions. Show me your evidence, Burnham demanded. Tony's fingers danced across holographic controls, pulling up data from the Avengers universe. Temporal anomalies. Reality distortions. Stephen Strange's own records from the time stone showing probability branches collapsing. All of it pointed to a source outside their dimension, specifically, to the Discovery-era Star Trek universe. The math checks out, Adira admitted reluctantly. Captain, if they're right, we're looking at a multiversal extinction event. Everything we've rebuilt since the burn, the Federation, the dilithium network, the restored warp capability, we're just feeding it more power. Then we stop feeding it, Rayner said. We shut down all dilithium reactions galaxy-wide. You'd be back in the Dark Ages, Steve observed. Cut off, isolated, helpless. We've survived worse. Have you? Tony's question wasn't mocking, it was genuinely curious. Because from what I've read in your database, the burn nearly destroyed you. You lost hundreds of worlds, countless lives, your entire civilization fragmented. And you're telling me you'd do it again voluntarily? To save the multiverse? Burnham met his gaze steadily. Yes. Something shifted in Tony's expression, respect, perhaps, or recognition. Okay. I can work with that level of crazy. But let's exhaust our other options first. Outside Discovery, the situation was growing tense. Thor had moved closer to the Veribin Nebula, Stormbreaker crackling with contained lightning. His Asgardian senses, honed through millennia of facing cosmic threats, detected something the Federation sensors missed. The nebula wasn't just pulsing with energy. It was watching. Brother Strange, he called through their comm link. I believe we have attracted unwanted attention. Hulk, floating nearby in the void thanks to one of Tony's emergency force field generators, growled agreement. Hulk feel it too. Something angry. Something hungry. Captain Marvel blazed forward, her cosmic awareness extending into the nebula itself. What she found made her photonic aura flare defensively. Contact. Multiple signatures emerging from the nebula's core. There. The nebula erupted. From its churning depths emerged vessels unlike anything in Federation records. They weren't ships in the conventional sense, they were temporal constructs, fragments of different time periods fused into impossible configurations. A Klingon bird of prey from the 23rd century merged with Borg technology from the 24th, powered by dilithium drives that shouldn't work anymore, all held together by the same temporal energy that sustained the feeding entity. And they were numerous. Red alert. Burnham's voice cut through the conference room. The view screen shifted to tactical display, showing dozens of temporal chimera vessels surrounding Discovery. All hands to battle stations. The Avengers responded instantly. Years of fighting together had honed their coordination to razor precision. Captain Marvel and Thor moved to intercept the lead vessels, their combined power enough to vaporize conventional starships. Scarlet Witch erected reality-warping shields around Discovery itself, her chaos magic interacting strangely with the ship's deflector systems, enhancing them in ways that made Christopher's tactical console light up with impossible readings. Our shields just increased by 300%. He reported, stunned. And I'm reading, structural reinforcement. The hull's molecular bonds are being strengthened in real time. Thank the glowing witch lady later, Tony said, his armor sealing as he prepared for combat. Right now, we've got hostiles inbound. Vision phased through Discovery's hull, earning startled yelps from crew members, and emerged in space, his density shifting to maximum as he intercepted an incoming barrage of temporal weapons fire. The energy washed over him, and for a moment, his form flickered between different versions of himself, the vision powered by the Mind Stone, the reconstructed white vision, the spectral form that existed between life and death. Fascinating, he transmitted, his voice calm despite the assault. These weapons are targeting probability itself. They're trying to eliminate the timeline where I exist to stop me. Can they? Natasha asked from inside Discovery, where she and Clint had been brought aboard to coordinate with Federation Tactical. Unknown. I am somewhat uncertain about my own existence currently. Spider-Man web slung between debris, using webbing that somehow held in vacuum thanks to Stark tech modifications, and grabbed a chunk of destroyed starship. Heads up, angry time ghost things. He hurled it at an approaching Chimera vessel with strength that surprised even him. The impact crumpled the hybrid ship's temporal structure, causing it to phase out of existence. Did I just untime a spaceship? Peter asked, confused. Kid, I stopped asking those questions around the time we fought a purple space titan, Clint replied, firing explosive arrows through Discovery's opened launch bay. Each arrow was tagged with Stark tech, allowing him to curve shots through the zero-gravity battlefield with impossible precision. But the Chimera vessels kept coming. And worse. They were learning. One vessel targeted Black Panther, firing a weapon that appeared to be a temporally displaced photon torpedo merged with Dominion polaron beams. Chala's vibranium suit absorbed the impact, but the temporal component created ripples through his personal timeline. For a fractional second, he existed as both the living king and the dead man Thanos had killed on the Statesman. Chala. Steve's voice carried concern as he activated his own emergency force field and launched toward his teammate. I'm intact, Chala gasped, his suit's kinetic energy redistribution systems glowing purple as they processed the absorbed temporal assault. But these weapons are unlike anything Wakandan science has encountered. They're attacking our individual timelines, trying to erase our existence retroactively. Inside Discovery, Bruce Banner worked frantically alongside Federation engineers. Your shield harmonics, they're cycling through frequencies trying to block conventional weapons. But these aren't conventional. You need to match the temporal signature, create interference patterns that. We don't have the technology for that, Adira interrupted. Then invent it. Bruce's eyes flashed green briefly. Or let me invent it. Or let the other guy out and he'll just smash everything. Your choice, but choose fast. Burnham made a split-second decision. Do it. Commander Rayner, give him full access to engineering systems. Captain. Now, Commander. Outside, Dr. Strange had stopped holding back. His hands wove patterns that made reality itself bend. The crimson bands of Sidorak wrapped around 3 Chimera vessels simultaneously, crushing them into impossibility. The winds of Watum scattered another squadron like leaves. And from the eye of Agamotto, the Time Stone's power blazed forth, not to manipulate time directly, but to stabilize it, creating pockets of temporal certainty where the Chimera weapons couldn't function. But even Strange had limits. There are too many, he transmitted, strain evident in his voice. And they're connected to something deeper. These vessels are just extensions, puppets animated by the true threat. Thor reached the nebula's edge and drove Stormbreaker into the heart of a massive chimera construct, a fused amalgamation of what looked like a Borg cube, a Romulan warbird, and something else entirely. Lightning exploded through its temporal structure, and for a moment, Thor saw something impossible. Inside the vessel's heart was a child. A Kelpian child, its form twisted and wrong, existing in a state of perpetual transformation. Sukal, or what remained of him, trapped in a temporal loop, his scream echoing across 40 years, feeding something vast and hungry. Avengers. Thor's voice carried across all channels. I have found the source. The entity has taken a hostage, a child, trapped in temporal stasis, forced to generate the energy it feeds upon. Burnham's blood ran cold. Sukal is supposed to be safe on Sanctuary 4. We rescued him. You rescued one version of him, Strange said, understanding dawning. But the temporal feedback from the burn created echoes. Copies of that moment scattered across time. This entity has been collecting them, harvesting their trauma, using their screams to sustain itself. Then we free them, Steve Rogers said simply. All of them. It won't let us, Tony countered, his sensors detecting something new. It knows we're a threat now. And it's coming. From the heart of the Veribin Nebula, something ancient stirred. The temporal chimera vessels stopped their assault and turned in unison, their movements synchronized like a hive mind. And behind them, space itself began to crack. What emerged defied description, a being that existed simultaneously in past, present, and future, its form shifting between states of matter, energy, and pure temporal probability. It had no mouth, but Discovery's universal translator screamed trying to process its communication. It had no eyes, but it saw everything, every moment, every timeline, every possibility. It saw the Avengers. It saw Discovery. It saw threats to its eternal feast. And it was hungry. The entity's presence warped reality like a stone dropped in still water. Discovery's viewscreen struggled to display it, the image flickering between impossibilities, showing a creature that was simultaneously crystalline energy, organic matter, and pure temporal distortion. Federation sensors simply gave up, displaying error messages in 17 languages. Temporal predator, Dr. Strange said, his voice tight with concentration as he maintained protective wards around the assembled forces. It exists outside linear time, feeding on moments of catastrophic temporal disruption. The burn was like ringing a dinner bell across the entire galaxy. Adira's hands flew across their console. Captain, I'm detecting temporal signatures dating back to the burn's origin point, but also forward. This thing has been feeding on Sukal's scream not just for 40 years, but across all possible timelines where the burn could have occurred. It's harvesting infinite variations of the same trauma. That's sick, Peter Parker said, his voice young but angry. Taking a kid's worst moment and making him live it forever. That's worse than Mysterio. Worse than anything. The entity pulsed, and suddenly the battle space changed. Time became fluid. Thor swung Stormbreaker at a chimera vessel, but the blow landed 3 seconds before he threw it, causing a paradox that made the God of Thunder stumble. Captain Marvel's photon blasts fired backwards through time, hitting targets that hadn't yet appeared. Even Hulk, whose rage transcended conventional physics, found himself moving in slow motion while everything around him accelerated. It's controlling local temporal flow. Bruce Banner's voice came from Discovery's engineering section, where he'd integrated himself with Federation systems in ways that were giving Chief Engineer Reno a migraine. The entity can manipulate time in its immediate vicinity. We need to create a temporal anchor, something that exists outside its influence. The spore drive, Burnham said suddenly. The mycelial network exists outside normal spacetime. If we can access it. You have a biological propulsion system that accesses a multidimensional fungal network. Tony's voice carried equal parts disbelief and fascination. Okay, that's officially weirder than anything in our universe, and we have a talking raccoon with a gun. Focus, Stark, Steve Rogers called out, his shield deflecting temporal weapon fire that existed in 3 different time periods simultaneously. Can this spore drive help us? Commander Stamets to bridge, came a familiar voice. I heard everything. Captain, if we jump to the mycelial network, we can establish a temporal baseline, a fixed point the entity can't manipulate. But someone needs to keep it distracted long enough for me to calculate the jump coordinates. I believe that is our specialty, Chala said calmly, his suit still crackling with absorbed kinetic energy from the temporal assault. Avengers, we need to buy time. Literally, Clint muttered, firing an arrow that split into 12 microdrones, each carrying temporal stabilizers Tony had fabricated using Discovery's replicators. The drones attached to Chimera vessels, creating small pockets of normalized time that allowed the Federation ship's weapons to function properly. Scarlet Witch extended her hands, reality bending to her will. But something was wrong. In this universe, her chaos magic interacted differently with the fundamental forces. Where she expected to reshape matter, she instead found herself touching something deeper, the underlying structure of subspace itself. Wanda, your energy signature just spiked, Vision called out, phasing through debris to reach her. What are you doing? I don't know, she admitted, her eyes glowing red. The magic feels different here. It's not just changing what is, it's touching what could be. All the possibilities, all the potential timelines. She gasped. I can see them. Every version of the burn. Every Sukal. Every moment where things went wrong. The entity noticed. It turned its formless attention towards Scarlet Witch, recognizing something familiar. Another being that touched probability itself. Another that could reshape reality. A threat. Temporal weapons fire converged on Wanda's position. Chala moved to intercept, his vibranium suit absorbing blast after blast, but even vibranium had limits when the attacks existed across multiple time periods. Captain America threw his shield, the vibranium disc cutting through impossible angles as Steve calculated trajectories that made no geometric sense, and managed to deflect 3 simultaneous shots. But one got through. The temporal weapon struck Wanda directly, and for a moment, she existed in superposition. The girl in Sokovia watching her parents die, the woman watching Pietro fall, the widow mourning Vision, the Avenger fighting Thanos, the broken soul in Westview creating false realities. All versions of Wanda Maximoff, all moments of grief, all existing simultaneously. No. Vision phased to maximum density and grabbed her, his synthetic body providing an anchor to the present moment. Wanda, focus on my voice. You are here. You are now. You are. I'm everywhere, Wanda whispered, tears streaming down her face. I can see it all, Vision. Every timeline. Every universe. The entity, it showed me how it sees reality. It's not evil. It's just, hungry. And we're all just food. Doctor Strange moved instantly, his astral form wrapping around Wanda's consciousness, pulling her back from the temporal abyss. Wanda Maximoff, I bind you to this moment. By the Vishanti, by the powers of the dark dimension denied, by the eye of Agamotto. You are here, you are now, you are real. The spell snapped Wanda back to singular existence. She collapsed against Vision, gasping, but her eyes were still glowing. Stephen. I saw something. The entity has a weakness. It can only feed on temporal disruptions it's experienced before. New disruptions, ones it hasn't encountered, confuse it. Starve it. How do we create new temporal disruptions? Burnham asked over the comm channel. You don't, Bruce Banner's voice came through, tinged with green. But the Hulk might. Inside Discovery's engineering bay, something was happening. Bruce Banner stood before the spore drive interface, his body trembling with contained transformation. The gamma radiation that created the Hulk existed in a quantum state, neither fully matter nor energy, but something that violated conservation laws at the subatomic level. And when it interacted with the mycelial network's multidimensional biology. "Oh no," Reno said, backing away. "Commander Stamets, he's touching the drive interface directly." Stamets rushed forward. "If his energy signature contaminates the network." "It won't contaminate," Bruce said through gritted teeth, his skin beginning to turn green. "It'll anchor. The Hulk exists in a state of perpetual impossibility. I get stronger the angrier I get, that violates thermodynamics. I should collapse into a singularity, but I don't. I'm a walking temporal paradox wrapped in gamma radiation. And if the entity feeds on temporal disruption." His transformation completed. The Hulk stood in Discovery's engineering bay, too large for the space, but somehow not damaging anything. His massive hand rested on the spore drive interface, and the mycelial network reacted. Across the entire multidimensional fungal network, something unprecedented occurred. The Hulk's quantum impossibility propagated through every reality where the network existed. The entity, feeding on the Burn's temporal echoes, suddenly encountered something it couldn't process. A disruption that violated the laws it knew. A paradox that existed simply because it was too angry to not exist. "Hulk, make new rules," the green giant roared, and slammed his other fist into the deck. The impact sent a shockwave through the mycelial network that emerged in normal spacetime as pure impossibility. The Chimera vessels froze mid-attack, their temporal weapons failing as their connection to the entity's timeline manipulation stuttered. The entity itself recoiled, its formless mass contracting as it tried to process what it was experiencing. "It's working!" Adira shouted. "The entity's temporal field is destabilizing. Captain, we have a window." "Stamets, execute the jump." Burnham ordered. "On it." Stamets worked frantically, recalculating coordinates while standing dangerously close to a very angry Hulk. "But Captain, the Hulk's quantum signature is interfacing with the spore drive in ways I've never seen. If we jump now, we might bring him, and his temporal paradox, into the mycelial network itself. Will that hurt him?" Steve Rogers demanded, having fought his way to Discovery's hull where he clung to the exterior plating with magnetic boots. "Hurt Hulk? No. Hurt the fabric of spacetime across infinite dimensions? Possibly." Thor laughed, a booming sound that carried across the comm channels. "Then it seems we have found our weapon. The entity feeds on temporal chaos. Let us give it indigestion." "That's actually not a terrible idea," Tony admitted, his armor's arc reactor glowing as he channeled maximum power to weapon systems. "Strange, can you amplify the effect? Make the Hulk's temporal paradox contagious?" "Contagious paradoxes?" Dr. Strange paused mid-spell. "That's actually brilliant and terrifying. If I extend the Hulk's quantum impossibility through the temporal field, the entity won't be able to feed without poisoning itself." "Do it," Burnham decided. "All ships, all personnel, prepare for mycelial jump. And someone please make sure the Hulk doesn't break my ship while he's saving the multiverse." Reno raised a hand. "I'll handle it. I've dealt with weird before." She approached the Hulk cautiously. The green giant turned, his eyes burning with barely contained rage. But Reno just crossed her arms and looked up at him with the expression of someone who'd survived the burn, the dark ages, and countless impossible repairs. "Listen, big guy. You're doing great. Very impressive. But if you break my spore drive, I'm going to be very disappointed. And trust me, you don't want to disappoint a Federation engineer who's been fixing impossible things for 40 years. The Hulk blinked. Then, incredibly, he grunted and nodded, carefully adjusting his grip on the drive interface to be less destructive. Good. Now hold steady while we jump through a fungal network that connects all realities. No big deal. Outside, the entity realized it was losing control. Its temporal predation was being disrupted by something that shouldn't exist. In desperation, it did something unprecedented. It reached backward through time to the moment of the burn's origin, attempting to amplify Su'Kal's scream, to create a feedback loop so powerful it would overwhelm even the Hulk's paradoxical existence. It's going for the source. Strange warned. If it amplifies the original burn, every timeline will experience it simultaneously. The damage will be exponential. Then we stop it at the source, Captain America said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Avengers, we're going back to where this started. Discovery, we need you to jump to the moment of the burn. That's 40 years in the past, Commander Rayner objected. The temporal mechanics alone are already violated, Adira interrupted. Commander, with the Hulk's quantum signature interfacing with the spore drive, normal temporal mechanics don't apply. We could theoretically jump to any point in the mycelial network's existence, including 40 years ago. Burnham looked at her crew, then at the impossible warriors fighting alongside them, then at the entity that threatened everything. The Prime Directive was clear, no interference with temporal events. But the Prime Directive was written for a universe that made sense. This wasn't that universe anymore. Stamets, set coordinates for Sanctuary 4, 40 years ago. The moment of the burn. We're going to stop this before it starts. Captain, the temporal paradox. I know. Do it anyway. The spore drive activated, drawing power from Discovery's warp core, the Hulk's impossible existence, and Doctor Strange's temporal stabilization spells. The mycelial network blazed with light as reality bent around impossible mathematics. And Discovery, along with the Avengers, jumped through time itself, racing backward to confront a catastrophe before it could consume the multiverse. Behind them, the entity screamed silently across every timeline, knowing it was about to lose its eternal feast. And in front of them, a Kelpian child prepared to scream. 40 years earlier. Sanctuary 4. The moment before everything changed. Discovery emerged from the mycelial network into a universe that felt different, younger, more intact, unbroken by the catastrophe that would define it. The Federation still stretched across hundreds of worlds. Dilithium-powered ships moved freely through subspace. The galaxy hummed with possibility instead of grief. But on the planet below, in a crashed Kelpian vessel buried beneath radiation storms, a child was about to scream. Temporal coordinates confirmed, Adira said, their voice shaking. We're in the correct time frame. Captain, we have approximately 4 minutes before Su'Kal's distress reaches critical levels and triggers the dilithium detonation cascade. The Avengers floated in formation around Discovery, their enhanced senses absorbing a galaxy that hadn't yet fallen. Tony's sensors detected thousands of active warp signatures, a stark contrast to the sparse, cautious travel of the 32nd century. Thor felt the universe's temporal threads flowing naturally, not twisted by the feeding entity's presence. Even Hulk seemed calmer, the ambient wrongness that had kept him enraged now absent. It hasn't happened yet, Bruce Banner said from engineering, having resumed human form when they jumped. His scientific mind was racing. We're in a timeline where the burn hasn't occurred. But our presence here, along with the entity's interference, means we're already creating a paradox. A paradox we intend to resolve, Dr. Strange said, his astral form extending down toward the planet. The eye of Agamotto pulsed as he examined the temporal threads converging on this moment. The entity is already here, embedded in the quantum foam around Sanctuary 4. It's been waiting for this moment for, it's difficult to say. Time doesn't mean the same thing to it. So it knew the burn would happen before it happened? Peter Parker asked, confused. That's like, pre-crime for cosmic disasters. More accurately, it exists in a state where past, present, and future are experienced simultaneously, Vision explained, his synthetic mind processing concepts that made human consciousness ache. From the entity's perspective, it has always been feeding on the burn. Our arrival to prevent it creates a causal loop that. Can we stop it or not? Natasha interrupted. The philosophy lesson can wait. Captain America was already moving. Avengers, we need 2 teams. Team 1 goes down to the planet, finds Sukal, and prevents the scream. Team 2 stays in orbit and deals with the entity when it realizes what we're doing. It already realizes, Strange warned. It's aware of every timeline. It knows we're here to stop its food source. As if responding to his words, space around Sanctuary 4 began to ripple. The entity manifested, but different than before. Here, in the past, it was less substantial, more potential than actual. It hadn't yet gorged itself on 40 years of temporal disruption. It was hungry but weak. That made it desperate. Chimera vessels began appearing, fewer than in the future, cruder in design. These were early attempts, the entity learning how to weaponize temporal echoes. A 24th century Defiant class merged with 23rd century Constitution parts. A Romulan warbird twisted through time until its hull existed in 3 different centuries simultaneously. They're still dangerous, Christopher reported from Discovery's tactical station. And they're converging on the planet. If they reach Sukal first. They won't, Chala said, his Wakandan fighter craft materializing from Discovery's shuttle bay. Tony had somehow replicated it using Federation technology in the brief window between battles. Black Panther, Spider-Man, Captain America, Black Widow, Hawkeye, we go to the surface. The rest of you hold orbit. Agreed, Burnham said. Commander Rayner, you have the con. I'm going with the landing party. Captain. That child down there is the key to everything. If the entity reaches him first, the burn happens on schedule and we've accomplished nothing. I know the Kelpian psychology, I know Sukal's history. You need me down there. Steve Rogers nodded approvingly. A captain who leads from the front. I can respect that. Don't get used to it, Rayner muttered. In our time, you're too valuable to risk on away missions. In our time, Burnham corrected, that child is already saved. Here, he's about to doom the galaxy. Commander, you have Discovery. Keep that entity busy. The landing party materialized on Sanctuary 4's surface in a crackle of transporter energy and repulsor-assisted descent. The planet was a nightmare of radiation storms and electromagnetic interference, conditions that would have killed most beings instantly. But Tony's suits provided shielding, Chala's vibranium absorbed the excess energy, and Steve's super-soldier physiology endured what would kill ordinary humans. Burnham wore an environmental suit, her tricorder scanning for the crashed Kelpian vessel. This way. The ship is buried 300 meters below the surface, surrounded by dilithium deposits that, she stopped. Oh no. What? Natasha asked, her weapons ready. The dilithium deposits. They're already resonating with Sukal's distress. Captain, in my timeline, we had weeks to plan the rescue. Here, we have minutes. If his scream reaches harmonic frequency with the dilithium. Boom goes the galaxy, Clint finished grimly. So we don't let him scream. How hard can it be to calm down a traumatized child who's been alone for years? Peter's spider sense suddenly blazed. Guys? We've got company. From the radioactive storms emerged figures that made even the Avengers pause. The entity had sent its temporal echoes, but not ships this time. It had sent warriors. Klingon from multiple eras, their honor codes twisted by temporal manipulation into mindless aggression. Borg drones that flickered between assimilation and deactivation. Even what appeared to be Starfleet officers, their uniforms spanning 3 centuries, their eyes empty of consciousness. It's puppeting them, Strange's voice came through their comm systems from orbit. Using temporal echoes of people who died in the burn. They're not real. They're possibilities given form by the entity's hunger. Real enough to shoot at us, Tony said, his repulsors charging. And I'm betting they're programmed to reach Sukal first. Chala's suit analyzed the approaching temporal warriors. They're unstable. Their timeline anchors are weak. Vibranium should disrupt their coherence. He extended his energy claws. But we need to reach the child before they do. Then we split up, Steve decided. Parker, you're the fastest ground mover we have. Take Captain Burnham and get to Sukhal. The rest of US will hold the line here. Me? But I'm just. You're an Avenger, Steve said firmly. Act like one. Go. Peter nodded, his usual quips dying in his throat. This was real. This mattered. Yes, sir. He grabbed Burnham, earning a startled yelp, and launched into the radioactive storm using weblines attached to crystalline outcroppings. His spider sense guided him through radiation that would have killed him in seconds without Tony's suit modifications, navigating by instinct and Burnham's shouted directions. Behind them, battle erupted. Captain America's shield sang through the air, striking temporal warriors and disrupting their coherence. Each impact sent ripples through their timeline anchors, causing them to flicker between existence and oblivion. But for every warrior that fell, two more emerged from the storms. Black Panther moved like liquid violence, his vibranium claws shearing through temporal constructs while his suit's kinetic energy redistribution turned their attacks into fuel for his counterstrikes. A temporal Klingon bat'leth struck his chest with force enough to shatter steel. He absorbed the impact, spun, and released it as a concussive blast that scattered 6 warriors into component timelines. Natasha and Clint fought as they always had. Perfect synchronization born from years of partnership. Her widow's bites electrified temporal constructs while his arrows carried temporal stabilizers, pinning warriors to a single moment where they could be fought conventionally. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. Tony flew above the battle, his armor's weapon systems recalibrated to target temporal instabilities rather than physical targets. Jarvis, highlight the weakest timeline anchors. I'm going to destabilize the whole formation. Sir, doing so may create a cascade effect that. Yeah, temporal paradox, universe explodes. Add it to the list. His repulsors fired in calculated sequence, each blast hitting a different temporal warrior at precise intervals. The effect cascaded, one warrior's collapse disrupted the timeline of another, which disrupted another, until a dozen temporal constructs dissolved simultaneously. But the victory was temporary. More kept coming. In orbit, the situation was equally desperate. Thor and Captain Marvel formed the primary offensive line, their combined cosmic power enough to shatter conventional fleets. But these Chimera vessels weren't conventional. They existed in multiple time periods, attacking from past, present, and potential future simultaneously. Thor's lightning struck a Romulan warbird, only to have the ship's hull reconstitute from an earlier timeline where the damage hadn't occurred. This is madness. Thor roared, frustration bleeding into his voice. How do we fight enemies that refuse to stay defeated? By being more stubborn than they are, Carol Danvers replied, her photonic energy blazing as she absorbed weapons fire that would have vaporized Discovery. I fought Kree, Skrulls, and whatever Thanos was. These ships are just temporal tricks. They can't actually change what already happened, they can only make us think they did. Then how do we make them stop thinking? Hulk's voice came from Discovery's engineering bay, where he'd remained connected to the spore drive, his quantum impossibility serving as an anchor for the ship's temporal position. We show them something impossible, Dr. Strange said. He raised his hands, and the crimson bands of Sidorak extended across thousands of kilometers, wrapping around Chimera vessels like scarlet chains. But instead of crushing them, he did something different. Vision, I need your assistance. I am here, Vision said, phasing through space with density reduced to near zero. The Mind Stone gave you understanding of reality beyond human comprehension. Even without it, that knowledge remains. Help me show these vessels something their timeline manipulation cannot process. Vision understood. His synthetic mind merged with strange magical perception, creating a hybrid perspective that existed between science and sorcery. Together, they projected an image into the temporal field. Not an attack, but a concept. The idea of linear time itself. Cause and effect. Past leading to present leading to future. The fundamental structure that the entities feeding had violated. The chimera vessels recoiled. Their temporal manipulation systems, designed to exploit nonlinear time, couldn't process the concept of time flowing in only one direction. It was anathema to their existence. Several ships simply dissolved, their temporal paradoxes collapsing under the weight of logical causality. "It's working," Adira reported. "The temporal field is stabilizing. If we can maintain this." The entity screamed. Not with sound, with causality itself. The scream propagated backward and forward through time simultaneously, a wave of temporal chaos that threatened to overwhelm Strange and Vision's conceptual assault. Discovery shook. The Hulk roared as his quantum impossibility strained against the entity's desperate hunger. Even Carol Danvers, who had absorbed the power of an infinity stone, felt her photonic energy flicker. And on the planet's surface, buried beneath 300 meters of radioactive rock, Sukao, young, alone, terrified, felt the entity's touch and began to scream in response. The harmonic resonance began. Dilithium across the galaxy started to vibrate at frequencies that violated quantum mechanics. In 4 minutes, it would detonate. The burn would begin. The entity would feast for 40 years. Unless Spider-Man and Captain Burnham reached the child first. Peter Parker had faced impossible situations before. He'd fought the Vulture while a building collapsed around him. He'd battled Mysterio's illusions across Europe. He'd turned to dust in Tony Stark's arms and somehow come back. But swinging through radioactive storms on an alien planet 40 years in the past to prevent a galactic catastrophe while carrying a Starfleet captain was definitely in his top 5 weirdest moments. Left. No, your other left. Burnham shouted over the howling wind, her tricorder barely functioning in the electromagnetic interference. "I only have one left." Peter yelled back, web-slinging between crystalline formations that glowed with unstable dilithium energy. His spider sense was going haywire, warning him of danger from every direction simultaneously. The radiation, the temporal instability, the approaching harmonic resonance, everything was screaming at him to run. He kept moving forward. There. Burnham pointed at a massive rock formation. "The ship is directly below. We need to." The ground exploded upward. From the depths emerged more temporal warriors, but these were different. These were Kelpians, Sukao's own people, twisted into temporal echoes by the entity's manipulation. Their ganglia extended in permanent threat displays, their eyes empty of the intelligence that defined their species. They moved with predatory grace, surrounding Peter and Burnham in seconds. "They're not real," Burnham said, her phaser drawn but trembling. "They're just temporal constructs. Just possibilities given form. They feel pretty real to me." Peter webbed 2 of them, yanking them off their feet. But more kept coming, climbing over each other to reach their targets. His spider sense was screaming so loud he could barely think. Then he remembered what Captain America had said. "You're an Avenger. Act like one." Peter stopped retreating. He planted his feet, felt the strength in his muscles that came from a radioactive spider bite, and remembered every lesson Tony had taught him. Every fight alongside the Avengers. Every moment where he'd proven he belonged. "Okay," he said, his voice steadier. "Okay. I got this." He moved. Not like a scared kid. Like an Avenger. His enhanced strength sent temporal Kelpians flying. His webbing created barriers faster than they could surround him. His spider sense, instead of overwhelming him with danger, became a tactical asset, showing him where to move, where to strike, where to web. In 15 seconds, he'd cleared a path to the rock formation. "Captain, can you blast through?" Burnham adjusted her phaser to maximum setting. "It'll take too long. We need..." Above them, a crimson portal opened in defiance of all Federation physics. Doctor Strange's astral form emerged, his hands weaving spell matrices that made Burnham's tricorder display error messages in languages that hadn't been invented yet. "I can't maintain this long," Strange said, strain evident in his voice. "The temporal interference is too severe. But I can give you 30 seconds. His magic carved through 300 meters of solid rock like it was mist, creating a tunnel straight down to the crashed Kelpian vessel. Peter grabbed Burnham again and dove through the opening, his webbing cushioning their descent as they plummeted into darkness. They landed in a chamber that defied description. The Kelpian ship had crashed centuries ago by local reckoning, but temporal distortions made time meaningless here. Parts of the vessel existed in pristine condition, freshly crashed. Other sections had decayed for millennia. And in the center, surrounded by dilithium crystals that pulsed with sympathetic energy, was a child. Sukal. He was young, perhaps 6 or 7 by human standards, his Kelpian features delicate and afraid. Holographic projections surrounded him, created by the ship's failing systems to provide companionship. But they were corrupted, their images flickering between comfort and nightmare. The child sat in the center of it all, his ganglia extended in permanent terror, his voice rising in a scream that resonated with frequencies human ears couldn't hear. But Peter's spider sense could feel it. The harmonic building. The quantum resonance spreading through every dilithium crystal in the galaxy. 3 minutes until catastrophic cascade. "Sukal," Burnham said softly, stepping forward with her hands raised peacefully. "My name is Michael. I'm here to help." The child's eyes, wild with fear and isolation, fixed on her. His scream wavered but didn't stop. The holograms around him twisted, becoming defensive, placing themselves between Sukal and the strangers. "He doesn't understand," Peter said, his enhanced senses reading the child's body language. "He's been alone so long, he thinks we're another threat. Then we show him we're not." Burnham knelt, making herself small and non-threatening. "Sukal, I know you're scared. I know you've been alone. But you don't have to be anymore. We're here. We're real. And we're going to take you somewhere safe." The child's scream intensified. 2 minutes until the burn. Above them, the entity pushed harder. It could feel its feast slipping away, could sense the Avengers and Federation working to prevent the catastrophe that would sustain it. In desperation, it reached through time itself, touching Sukal's mind with visions of the future, showing him the burn, the destruction, the galaxy torn apart. Showing him that his scream would kill billions. Sukal's eyes went wide with horror, and his scream became something worse. A wail of guilt and grief for deaths that hadn't happened yet but that he somehow knew he would cause. The harmonic resonance accelerated. 1 minute until cascade. "No, no, no." Burnham moved forward, but the temporal energy surrounding Sukal was too intense. Her environmental suit's shields couldn't handle the radiation. Peter's could. "I got this," he said, and before Burnham could stop him, he stepped into the maelstrom. The radiation should have killed him instantly. The temporal energy should have scattered his molecules across a dozen timelines. But Peter Parker had been bitten by a radioactive spider, had died and returned, had survived the blip and Thanos and everything the universe threw at him. He was tougher than he looked. He reached Sukal and wrapped his arms around the terrified child. "Hey," Peter said softly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Hey, it's okay. I know you're scared. I get scared too. Like, all the time. There's this thing called spider sense that basically just tells me I'm about to die, and it goes off constantly. It's the worst." Sukal's scream faltered slightly, confusion breaking through terror. "But here's what I learned," Peter continued, holding the child gently. Being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you smart. Because scary things are scary for a reason. But you know what's stronger than being scared? The child's ganglia began to retract slowly. Knowing you're not alone. Knowing that when bad things happen, and they will happen, trust me, there are people who will show up. People who will fight for you. People who will hold you when you're scared and tell you it's going to be okay. 30 seconds until the burn. I don't know if it will be okay, Sukal whispered, his first words in years. Me neither, Peter admitted. But I know we're going to try. And sometimes trying is enough. The harmonic resonance wavered. The dilithium crystal's vibration frequencies began to desynchronize. 20 seconds. In orbit, Dr. Strange felt the shift. It's working. Parker's disrupting the harmonic cascade. But the entity won't accept this. It's going to. The entity manifested its full form in orbit, not the weakened version from this timeline, but its complete self, pulling its consciousness forward from 40 years of feeding. The paradox should have been impossible, but desperation made it careless. It appeared around Sanctuary 4 like a noose tightening around the planet. It's trying to force the burn to happen manually, Vision observed, his analytical mind processing the entity's actions. If it cannot feed on Sukal's natural scream, it will create an artificial harmonic by manipulating the dilithium directly. Like hell it will, Tony said, his armor's arc reactor blazing. Jarvis, divert all power to repulsors. I'm going to punch a temporal entity in its non-existent face. Sir, that is inadvisable. Add it to the list. Thor flew alongside him, Stormbreaker crackling with the Bifrost's power. Stark, your bravado is admirable but futile. This entity exists beyond physical form. We cannot simply strike it. Watch me. But Tony was right, conventional attacks phased through the entity's form harmlessly. Captain Marvel's photonic blasts, Thor's lightning, even Hulk's gamma-infused rage transmitted through Discovery's weapons, nothing touched it. The entity continued its manipulation, forcing dilithium across the galaxy to resonate despite Sukal's silenced scream. 10 seconds until forced cascade. We need something it can't ignore, Natasha said from the surface, still fighting temporal warriors alongside the others. Something that threatens its existence directly. The mycelial network, Bruce Banner said suddenly from Discovery's engineering bay. If we can inject the Hulk's quantum paradox directly into the network while the entity is manifestating, it would poison every timeline the entity tries to access, Scarlet Witch finished, understanding dawning. Her chaos magic flared. But we'd need to amplify the effect across infinite dimensions simultaneously. That's impossible, Vision said. Which is precisely why it will work. The entity feeds on temporal disruption that follows natural laws. The Hulk is disruption that violates all laws. Wanda, if you channel your chaos magic through my phasing abilities while I'm connected to the mycelial network, we create a multiversal gamma infection that makes every timeline toxic to the entity, Strange concluded. Brilliant. Also potentially catastrophic if we miscalculate. 5 seconds. Do it, Burnham ordered. Captain's prerogative. Save my galaxy. Wanda and Vision moved in perfect synchronization. She extended her reality warping powers while he phased to pure energy, becoming a conduit between dimensions. Strange added his temporal manipulation through the eye of Agamotto. And in Discovery's engineering bay, the Hulk roared and slammed both fists into the spore drive interface. The mycelial network exploded with impossible energy. Across every universe where the network existed, infinite dimensions, infinite possibilities, the Hulk's quantum paradox propagated like a virus. The entity tried to feed and found only poison. Gamma radiation that violated conservation of energy. Chaos magic that rewrote probability itself. Temporal manipulation that made past, present, and future meaningless. The entity screamed. A sound that existed beyond normal senses, felt in the bones of every living thing as reality itself rejected the predator's presence. Its form began to unravel, its connection to this timeline severing as the mycelial network's infection spread to every moment it had tried to touch. 0 seconds. The burn cascade should have triggered. It didn't. Sukal, held safely in Peter Parker's arms, was silent. The dilithium crystals around them pulsed with normal, stable frequencies. Across the galaxy, ships continued their journeys unaware of the catastrophe that had almost occurred. The burn had been prevented. The entity, poisoned and starving, retreated into dimensional spaces where even Doctor Strange's senses couldn't follow. It wasn't destroyed, beings like it couldn't be truly destroyed, but it was driven away, denied its feast, forced to seek sustenance elsewhere across the infinite multiverse. On Sanctuary 4, Peter Parker sat with Sukal in his arms, both of them exhausted. Burnham knelt beside them, her tricorder confirming what her eyes told her: the child was stable. Alive. Safe. Is it over? Sukal asked quietly. For now, Peter said. But you know what? That's enough. Now is all we've got. Above them, Doctor Strange's portal reopened. We need to leave. The temporal paradoxes we've created are beginning to collapse. If we don't return to our proper timeline, we'll be stuck here, Tony finished. Yeah, got it. Time travel cleanup is always the worst part. The Avengers regrouped around Discovery, battered but victorious. They'd traveled to another universe, fought an entity that fed on time itself, and prevented a catastrophe that would have destroyed billions of lives. Just another day in the life of Earth's mightiest heroes. But as they prepared to return to their own time, questions remained. They'd stopped the burn in this timeline, but what about the future they'd come from? What about the 32nd century where the catastrophe had already occurred? Temporal mechanics are complicated, Strange said, reading their concerns. We've created a branch timeline. In this version of events, the burn never happens. But our original timeline, the one we came from, still exists. Still suffered. Still needs help. Then we're not done, Steve Rogers said simply. We go back. We finish this. Burnham watched them prepare to leave, these impossible warriors from another universe who had saved her galaxy before it fell. Thank you, she said simply. For everything. Tony's faceplate retracted, showing his exhausted smile. Lady, thank you for having the weirdest propulsion system in the multiverse. That spore drive thing is going to give me nightmares and inspiration for years. Sukal, still clinging to Peter, looked up at the Avengers with wide eyes. Will you come back? Peter knelt down to the child's level. Maybe. Probably not. Multiversal travel is really complicated and usually ends badly. But you know what? You're going to be okay. Captain Burnham and her friends will take care of you. And you're never going to be alone again. The Avengers returned to Discovery. Stamets, working with Bruce Banner, calculated the temporal coordinates to return them to the 32nd century, to the timeline where the burn had already happened, where 40 years of suffering awaited resolution. Ready when you are, Captain, Stamets said. Burnham nodded. Take us home. All of us. The spore drive activated. The mycelial network blazed with light. And Discovery, along with its impossible passengers, jumped forward through time, returning to a future that still needed saving. Behind them, in a timeline where the burn never occurred, the Federation continued to thrive. Ships traveled safely through warp space. Billions of lives continued uninterrupted. And a young Kelpian child, rescued from isolation, began the slow journey toward healing. One timeline saved. One more to go. We saved a universe that isn't ours while ours still suffers. We proved it could be stopped, Steve Rogers said, his voice carrying that unshakable certainty. If it can be stopped in one timeline, it can be stopped in this one. We just need a different approach. The entity is weakened though, Wanda Maximoff observed, her hands still glowing faintly with chaos magic. I can feel it. When we poisoned the mycelial network in the other timeline, the effect propagated across dimensional barriers. Not enough to drive it away here, but enough to hurt it. Vision nodded, his synthetic mind analyzing multidimensional energy patterns. Wanda is correct. The entity exists simultaneously across multiple realities. When we infected one version of the mycelial network, we infected them all. The entity here is wounded. Still feeding on the burn's 40-year-old echoes, but struggling to maintain coherence. Then we hit it while it's weak, Natasha said. She'd been silent since the jump, processing tactical implications. But we can't just repeat what we did in the past. We need to attack it in the present, cut off its food source now. How? Burnham asked. The burn already happened. The entity has been feeding for 40 years. We can't undo that. No, Dr. Strange said slowly, the eye of Agamotto pulsing as he examined temporal threads. But we can starve it. The entity feeds on temporal disruptions caused by dilithium detonations. What if we could reverse the polarity of those disruptions? Turn its food source into poison. Reverse temporal polarity, Adira breathed. That's theoretically possible if we could access the original moment of the burn and create an inverse harmonic. But we'd need a power source capable of generating antitemporal resonance across the entire galaxy simultaneously. Every eye turned to the Hulk. Bruce sighed. Of course. Why wouldn't it be me again? Your quantum impossibility already destabilized the entity once, Vision pointed out. If we could amplify that effect through the dilithium network itself, use the very system it's feeding on to deliver the poison. We'd turn the burn's aftermath into a weapon against the entity, Tony finished. I like it. It's crazy, violates about 40 laws of physics, and will probably kill us all. But I like it. There's a problem, Burnham said, her command training kicking in. The dilithium network we've rebuilt over the past year connects dozens of worlds, but it's fragile. If we channel that kind of energy through it, we risk destroying the only thing holding the post-burn Federation together. Then we don't use the dilithium network, Chala said. He'd been quiet since the jump, his analytical mind working through options. In Wakanda, we learned that the strongest solutions come from combining old wisdom with new innovation. Captain, your spore drive doesn't use dilithium. It exists outside conventional space-time. What if we used it as the delivery mechanism? Stamets stepped forward from his station. You're suggesting we use the mycelial network to distribute antitemporal resonance across every point in the galaxy simultaneously? That's brilliant and insane. The network connects everything, everywhere. If we could pulse the Hulk's quantum signature through it at precisely calibrated frequencies, we'd essentially rewrite the temporal signature of the burn, Bruce completed. Not change what happened, but change what it means to the entity. Make the entire event toxic instead of nourishing. Will it work? Steve asked. Strange considered, his mystical senses examining probability branches. There's a 73% chance of success. A 19% chance of catastrophic failure. And an 8% chance of something we can't predict. I've faced worse odds, Clint muttered. So have we, Burnham said, looking at her crew. Commander Rayner, Admiral Vance isn't going to like this. Admiral Vance isn't here, Rayner replied with a slight smile. And I seem to recall you once told me that sometimes captains have to make impossible choices. Make yours, Captain. Burnham nodded. We do it. Stamets, work with Dr. Banner and Mr. Stark. Figure out how to weaponize the mycelial network without destroying it. Strange, Vision, Wanda, I need you to calculate the exact temporal frequencies we'll need. The rest of you. She paused. The entity isn't going to let us do this unopposed. Prepare for a fight. As if summoned by her words, Discovery's sensors screamed warnings. "Captain, multiple contacts." Christopher reported from tactical. "Chimera vessels emerging from subspace all around us. Dozens, no, hundreds of them. It's assembling an entire fleet." Outside the viewscreen, space rippled with temporal distortions. The entity, wounded but desperate, was pulling every resource it had across 40 years of feeding. Ships from the Burns aftermath, destroyed vessels given terrible new life through temporal manipulation. Borg cubes merged with Klingon birds of prey. Romulan warbuds fused with Dominion attack ships. Even Federation vessels, twisted into unrecognizable configurations. And something new. At the center of the fleet, a massive construct was forming, a vessel built entirely from temporal energy, incorporating elements from every major power in the galaxy's history. It was part Borg cube, part Klingon battle cruiser, part Romulan singularity core, part Federation engineering. A chimera of chimeras, the entity's ultimate weapon. "That's new," Peter Parker said, his spider sense screaming danger so loud he could barely think. "It's adapting," Vision observed. "Learning from our previous encounters. That vessel incorporates countermeasures to everything we've used against it." Thor raised Stormbreaker, lightning arcing between his fingers. "Then we teach it new lessons." "Avengers," Steve Rogers said, his voice cutting through the mounting tension. "We've faced armies before. We've fought gods and monsters. This is no different. We hold the line while our people work. We don't retreat. We don't surrender. And we sure as hell don't let some temporal parasite destroy another universe on our watch." "Hell yes," Tony said, his faceplate snapping shut. "Jarvis, set repulsors to maximum. Let's remind this thing why you don't mess with Earth's mightiest heroes." Captain Marvel's photonic aura blazed bright enough to hurt unshielded eyes. "I can take the big one." "Thor, you with me?" "Always, Captain," Thor grinned, the battle joy of Asgard blazing in his eyes. "Let us show this abomination the meaning of power." Hulk's roar echoed through Discovery's corridors as he prepared to interface with the spore drive again. Hulk smash time monster. "That's actually a pretty accurate tactical assessment," Rayner admitted. The fleet advanced. Discovery's shields came online, enhanced by Scarlet Witch's chaos magic weaving through the deflector arrays. Federation phasers charged alongside Iron Man's repulsors. Klingon disruptors fired from the few Allied vessels that had responded to Burnham's distress call. And through it all, the Avengers moved with practiced precision. A team that had saved one universe and wasn't about to fail another. The battle for the 32nd century began. Captain Marvel and Thor hit the central chimera construct like a meteor strike, their combined power carving through temporal shielding that would have vaporized conventional weapons. Carol absorbed weapons fire that could have destroyed planets, converting it to fuel for her photonic blasts. Thor channeled the Bifrost itself through Stormbreaker, cutting through reality in ways that made the entity's temporal manipulation look primitive. But the construct adapted. Borg shields modulated to their frequencies. Romulan cloaking technology made it phase between dimensions. Klingon weapons systems targeted their emotional centers, weaponizing rage and confidence against them. "It's learning too fast." Carol transmitted, dodging a temporal displacement beam that would have aged her to dust. "Every attack we use, it develops a counter within seconds." "Then we improvise," Thor said, and did something unexpected. Instead of attacking the construct, he threw Stormbreaker past it, the hammer flying through space on an arc that made no tactical sense. Carol understood a split second before the entity did. Thor recalled Stormbreaker. The hammer returned through the construct's interior, carving a path that Carol immediately filled with photonic energy. The combination, mystical Asgardian weapon followed by cosmic-powered radiation, created an interaction the entity couldn't adapt to quickly enough. The construct's central core fractured. Opening. Vision called out, phasing through space toward the wound in the construct's defenses. His density shifted to maximum, and he drove both hands into the temporal core like a spear. I have accessed their command matrix. Wanda, now. Scarlet Witch extended her hands, chaos magic surging across space to link with Vision. Together, they created something unprecedented, a probability storm that attacked the construct's timeline coherence. Every possible outcome where it was destroyed, every quantum branch where it never existed, all collapsed into a single moment of overwhelming potential. The construct screamed, a sound that existed across multiple dimensions, and began to unravel. But victory came with a cost. The entity, sensing its weapon failing, did something desperate. It reached through Vision's connection to the construct and touched the part of him that had once held the Mind Stone. The synthetic being convulsed, his form flickering between existence and non-existence as the entity tried to erase him from the timeline entirely. Vision. Wanda's scream was raw with grief and rage. Her chaos magic exploded outward, no longer controlled, no longer careful. Reality itself bent to her will as she rejected the possibility of losing him again. No. You don't get to take him. Not again. Never again. The probability storm became a hurricane. Wanda's power, amplified by grief and love and absolute refusal to accept loss, reached across dimensional barriers and grabbed every timeline where Vision existed. Every possible reality where he was alive, whole, happy. And she pulled them all into this moment, making his existence so overwhelmingly probable that the entity couldn't erase him. Vision solidified, gasping, an unnecessary action for a synthetic being, but emotion made him human. Wanda, what you just did, the dimensional stress. You could have torn reality apart. I don't care, she said fiercely. You're staying. That's final. The construct, damaged by their assault and the entity's failed attempt to weaponize Vision, began to collapse. Smaller Chimera vessels rushed to defend it, but they faced an Avengers team that had just been reminded what they were fighting for. Spider-Man web-slung between vessels with Hawkeye on his back, the Archer firing explosive arrows with Peter's enhanced reflexes providing impossible angles. Black Panther's fighter craft wove through enemy fire, his vibranium hull absorbing and redistributing kinetic energy as devastating counterstrikes. Natasha, piloting a Federation shuttle with controls she'd learned in less than an hour, executed maneuvers that made Detmer, one of Starfleet's best pilots, watch in professional admiration. And in Discovery's engineering bay, Bruce Banner worked alongside Stamets and Tony Stark, three brilliant minds solving an impossible problem. The frequencies are calibrated, Bruce said, his hands steady despite the green tinge returning to his skin. If I transform now and interface with the spore drive, we can generate the anti-temporal pulse. But it's going to hurt. How bad? Tony asked. Imagine turning yourself inside out across every dimension simultaneously while maintaining quantum coherence. So, Tuesday for us. Do it. Bruce closed his eyes. See you on the other side. The transformation was more controlled this time. The Hulk emerged with purpose, his massive hands gripping the spore drive interface with surprising gentleness. The mycelial network responded, and across the galaxy, across every point where the Burns echoes still reverberated, something began to change. The entity felt it. Felt its food source turning to poison. Felt 40 years of accumulated temporal energy becoming toxic. Felt its eternal feast ending. And it raged. The entity's rage manifested as reality itself screaming. Across the 32nd century, sensors detected impossible readings. On Federation headquarters, Admiral Vance watched in horror as stellar cartography showed temporal distortions erupting across known space. On Nivar, Vulcan scientists recorded subspace fractures that violated every principle of quantum mechanics. On distant outposts and scattered colonies, people looked up at stars that suddenly flickered between past, present, and future states. The entity was no longer hiding. It was fighting for survival. The anti-temporal pulse is propagating through the mycelial network, Stamets reported, his voice strained as he monitored the spore drive's unprecedented output. But it's not moving fast enough. The entity is consuming everything it can before we poison it completely. Captain, it's accelerating its feeding, trying to gorge itself one last time before we cut off the supply. How long until the pulse reaches critical distribution? Burnham demanded. 4 minutes. Maybe 5. We don't have 5 minutes, Christopher called from tactical. The Chimera fleet is converging on our position. They're going to try to destroy the spore drive before the pulse completes. Outside Discovery, the battle had reached desperate intensity. The central Chimera construct, damaged but not destroyed, was drawing power from every other vessel in its fleet. Borg assimilation protocols merged with Romulan tactical calculations and Klingon berserker rage, creating a hybrid warfare doctrine that adapted faster than conventional tactics could counter. Captain Marvel flew through a barrage of temporal displacement weapons, her cosmic awareness the only thing keeping her alive as spacetime twisted around her. Thor, I could really use that lightning right about now. I am somewhat occupied. Thor roared, Stormbreaker spinning in defensive patterns as 3 Chimera cruisers tried to overwhelm him. Lightning arced between vessels, but Borg shielding adapted with each strike. These machines learn too swiftly. Then we teach them something they can't learn, Doctor Strange said. His astral form split into 3 separate projections, each casting different spells simultaneously. The crimson bands of Sidorak bound one vessel while the winds of Watum scattered another, and mystic shields deflected weapons fire from a third. But even Strange had limits, and those limits were approaching fast. Strange, your vitals are spiking, Tony transmitted, Jarvis monitoring everyone's conditions. You need to dial it back before you burn yourself out. Not an option, Stark. If I stop, they break through to Discovery. If they break through to Discovery, the spore drive fails. If the spore drive fails, the entity wins. Yeah, I got the stakes. Tony's arc reactor was running at 130% capacity. Dangerously beyond design specifications. His armor's systems were degrading from the sustained output, but he kept firing. Repulsor blasts carved through Chimera vessels while micromissiles sought vulnerable points in their temporal shielding. Jarvis, how long can we maintain this output? 90 seconds before catastrophic reactor failure, sir. Make it 2 minutes. Reroute everything non-essential. Life support, HUD, witty commentary protocols, shut it all down. All power to weapons. Inside Discovery, Wanda Maximoff stood at the center of the bridge, her chaos magic extending through every system, reinforcing shields and hull integrity in ways that made Federation engineers weep with joy and confusion. But the strain was showing. Blood trickled from her nose, and her hands trembled with each surge of power. Vision stood beside her, his synthetic form phasing rapidly to distribute incoming weapons fire across multiple densities. Wanda, your neural pathways are overloading. You must reduce output. Can't, she gasped. If I stop, the shields fail. If the shields fail, we all die. I understand. But if you continue at this rate, you will die anyway. Please, Wanda. Let me help carry the burden. She looked at him, this being she'd lost and found again, this impossible synthesis of technology and humanity who loved her despite every rational reason not to. Together. Always. Vision's hand found hers. His phasing abilities merged with her reality manipulation, creating a hybrid defense that existed between states of matter. Weapons fire that should have penetrated Discovery's shields instead phased through multiple dimensions, emerging in empty space light years away. It was elegant, impossible, and buying precious seconds. But seconds weren't enough. The central Chimera construct had finished absorbing power from its fleet. Now it moved forward, a mobile temporal singularity that made space itself bend around it. Its weapons weren't conventional. They fired probability itself, each shot representing a timeline where Discovery was destroyed. The ship's shields flickered as they defended against attacks that had already happened from the construct's perspective. Shields down to 30%. Christopher reported. Captain, we can't take another hit like that. Helm, evasive pattern Delta 9. Get us out of. Too late. The construct fired again, and this time the probability weapon connected with Discovery's secondary hull. The impact didn't destroy the ship, it erased part of it from this timeline. Engineering Section 2 simply ceased to have ever been built, leaving a gaping void where structural integrity should have been. Hull breach, decks 9 through 12. Damage reports flooded in. Emergency force fields are holding, but we've lost power too. Hulk's roar echoed through every corridor. In the engineering bay, the green giant felt the ship's pain as if it were his own. His connection to the spore drive had created an empathic link to Discovery itself, and the ship's damage translated to rage. Hulk's ship. Hulk's friends. Hulk protect. His gamma-infused quantum signature surged through the mycelial network with unprecedented intensity. The anti-temporal pulse that had been propagating gradually suddenly accelerated, spreading like wildfire across every point in the galaxy simultaneously. The lithium crystals that had once resonated with the Burns catastrophe now vibrated with the Hulk's impossible defiance of natural law. The entity felt it. Felt its food source becoming poison. Felt 40 years of accumulated power turning toxic. And it made a choice. If it couldn't feed, it would destroy. The entity abandoned subtlety and manifested its full form in normal space, something it had never done before, something that violated its own existence. It appeared around Discovery like a collapsing dimension, a being of pure temporal chaos made visible, touchable, vulnerable. And absolutely massive. Holy, Peter Parker's spider sense went into overload. That thing is the size of a moon. Bigger, Vision calculated. It's approximately 1.3 times the diameter of Earth's moon. And it's collapsing inward toward Discovery's position. It's going to crush us, Rayner said, his voice remarkably steady for someone facing impossible death. Captain, recommend we abandon ship. Get as many people to escape pods as we can before. No, Burnham said. The word carried absolute certainty. We don't abandon ship. We don't retreat. We finish this. Captain, I'm all for dramatic stands, but we literally cannot hurt something that size, Christopher objected. She's right though, Steve Rogers said, appearing on the view screen via comm link. He'd somehow commandeered a Federation shuttle and was flying toward the entity's manifestation with the kind of courage that bordered on insanity. It made itself vulnerable by manifesting physically. That means we can touch it. And if we can touch it, we can kill it, Natasha finished from her own shuttle, flying in formation with Steve. Or at least hurt it badly enough that it retreats. With what? Clint asked, firing arrows that looked impossibly small against the entity's vast form. I've got explosive arrows, EMP arrows, even arrows that say mean things when they hit. None of that's going to scratch something this big. We don't need to scratch it, Chala said, his fighter craft's vibranium hull gleaming as he joined the impossible assault. Wakanda teaches that the largest opponent can fall if you strike the right pressure point. Vision, scan for structural weaknesses, points where its temporal coherence is lowest. Scanning. Vision synthetic mind processed data faster than any computer. There. Multiple nodes distributed throughout its form where different timeline energies converge. They're maintaining its physical manifestation. If we could disrupt enough of them simultaneously, it would lose coherence and be forced to retreat to non-physical existence, Strange concluded. How many nodes? 47. We have 12 Avengers, one very angry green giant, and maybe 24 Federation personnel capable of flying combat craft, Tony calculated. Even splitting targets, we're outnumbered 4-1. Then we don't split targets, Carol Danvers said, her photonic energy blazing bright enough to be seen from light years away. We hit them all at once. Thor, can you channel the Bifrost through your hammer? Aye, but for what purpose? To make one fighter craft into 47. Thor understood. That would require precision beyond human capability, yes. Good thing I'm not entirely human anymore. Carol's cosmic awareness extended outward, touching each node simultaneously. I can feel them. All 47. I can guide the strikes if you can provide the multiplication effect. And I, Strange added, can ensure the timing is perfect. A spell of simultaneous occurrence, every attack landing in the same instant across all targets. That's insane, Bruce Banner's voice came through, back in human form after the Hulk surge. It would require quantum-level coordination across multiple vectors while maintaining temporal coherence during, he paused. Actually, that might work. But you'd need someone to serve as the central coordination point. Someone whose consciousness can process all the variables simultaneously. Vision, Wanda said immediately. His synthetic mind can handle computational loads that would burn out organic brains. I can attempt it, Vision agreed. But I will need Wanda to anchor my consciousness. The processing requirements will force me to fragment across multiple instances. Without an emotional anchor, I may lose cohesion permanently. I've got you, Wanda promised. Always. The plan came together with the speed born of desperation and trust. Vision's consciousness expanded, splitting into 47 instances while maintaining core coherence through Wanda's chaos magic anchoring. Each instance targeted a different node, guiding an attacker to the precise strike point. Carol Danvers channeled cosmic energy through her body, becoming a living amplifier for Thor's Bifrost. Strange wove a spell that made time itself pause. Just for a moment, just long enough for every attack to land simultaneously. The Avengers moved. Tony and his Iron Legion of replicated suits. Steve in his shuttle, vibranium shield ready. Natasha and Clint, their weapons enhanced by Stark technology. Chala-S fighter, vibranium hull gleaming. Peter swinging between nodes on webbing that shouldn't exist in vacuum but did anyway because sometimes you had to bend physics. Even Federation craft, Burnham herself piloting one, refusing to command from safety, joined the assault. And in Discovery's engineering bay, the Hulk roared one final time, pushing the anti-temporal pulse to maximum intensity. Every dilithium crystal in the galaxy vibrated with gamma-infused impossibility. The entity's food source became poison. Its accumulated power became weakness. Now. Strange's voice echoed across every comm channel. Time stopped. 47 attacks launched simultaneously. Repulsor blasts and lightning strikes and photonic energy and vibranium impacts and explosive arrows and chaos magic and quantum phase shifts and good old-fashioned human courage, all striking different points of the entity's manifested form in the same impossible instant. The entity's temporal coherence shattered. Its moon-sized form began to unravel, timeline energies separating like oil and water. The Borg components decayed into their original time period. The Klingon elements scattered across centuries. The Romulan singularity cores imploded, and the Federation technology reverted to blueprints and possibility. The entity screamed, a sound that every living being in the galaxy felt in their bones, and collapsed inward. Not destroyed, because beings like it couldn't be truly destroyed, but broken. Scattered. Forced to retreat into dimensional spaces so remote that even Dr. Strange's enhanced senses couldn't follow. The Chimera fleet dissolved like nightmares at dawn. 40 years of accumulated temporal constructs evaporated as their power source fled. Space around Discovery cleared, showing stars that had been hidden behind temporal distortions. Silence fell. Then, slowly, sensor readings normalized. The anti-temporal pulse completed its propagation through the mycelial network. Across the galaxy, the lithium crystals that had carried the Burns echo for 40 years finally settled into stable, untainted frequencies. "It's gone," Adira whispered, hardly daring to believe. "Captain, the entity's signature has vanished from all sensors. The temporal distortions are collapsing. The Burns echoes they're just memories now. Just history. Not active phenomena." Burnham slumped in her command chair, exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow. "Casualties? Minor injuries across the fleet. No fatalities." Rayner allowed himself a slight smile. "Captain, we won." "We did," she agreed. "We all did." The aftermath of victory was quieter than the battle, but no less significant. Discovery hung in space surrounded by Allied vessels, Federation ships, the few Klingon birds of prey that had answered the distress call, even a Nivar cruiser that had arrived during the final moments. And scattered among them, the Avengers floated in various states of exhaustion and relief. Tony Stark's armor was scorched and dented, systems running on backup power. His faceplate retracted, revealing a face lined with fatigue but wearing a satisfied smirk. "Jarvis, remind me to send a thank you card to whatever cosmic force thought it was a good idea to give me trust issues and an arc reactor. Both came in handy today. I shall add it to your to-do list, sir, right after survive impossible odds and violate multiple laws of physics." Thor landed on Discovery's hull with the kind of casual grace that came from being a god. Stormbreaker rested on his shoulder, still crackling with residual Bifrost energy. A worthy battle. The entity was a foe deserving of song. Though I confess, I prefer enemies with faces I can punch. "You punched reality itself," Carol Danvers pointed out, her photonic aura dimmed to a faint glow as she conserved energy. "That counts." Did it feel satisfying though? Not particularly. Inside Discovery, medical teams were treating the injured. Wanda Maximoff sat in sickbay, a Federation medic scanning her with a tricorder while she tried not to laugh at the device's primitive readings compared to Wakandan or Stark technology. Vision sat beside her, holding her hand despite having no physical need to rest. "Your neural pathways show significant strain," the medic reported. "I'm recommending 48 hours of rest and," he paused, staring at his tricorder. "Wait. Your cellular structure is rewriting itself? In real time?" "That's not possible." "Chaos magic," Wanda explained wearily. "It adapts. Fixes things. Usually without asking permission. I'll be fine in a few hours. If you're certain." "She's certain," Vision said politely but firmly. "Thank you for your concern." On the bridge, Burnham was in communication with Admiral Vance. The conversation had been intense. "Let me be clear, Captain," Vance's image on the viewscreen said, his tone walking the line between impressed and furious. "You created a branch timeline, weaponized the mycelial network, collaborated with extradimensional beings who arrived through unauthorized means, violated multiple temporal accords, and restructured the fundamental nature of dilithium across the entire galaxy. Do I have that correct?" "Yes, sir. And in doing so, you eliminated the temporal entity that had been feeding on the Burns echoes, stabilized our dilithium network, and potentially prevented a multiversal extinction event." "Also correct, sir." Vance was silent for a long moment. "Captain Burnham, you're either the most brilliant officer in Starfleet or the most reckless. I haven't decided which. With respect, Admiral, can't I be both?" A ghost of a smile crossed Vance's face. "Stand by for commendation. And court-martial. We'll see which one processes first." Vance out. The screen went dark. Rayner chuckled from his station. "Well, that went better than expected. He didn't actually threaten to have me thrown in the brig, so yes, I'd call that a win." Steve Rogers appeared on the bridge via transporter. He'd finally agreed to try it after watching Peter beam up and down a dozen times, and approached Burnham with his hand extended. Captain, on behalf of the Avengers, thank you. For trusting us. For working with us. For not treating us as the enemy when we arrived making threats. She shook his hand firmly. Captain Rogers, thank you for caring about a universe that isn't your own. Not everyone would have. Chaos magic, Wanda explained wearily. It adapts. Fixes things. Usually without asking permission. I'll be fine in a few hours. If you're certain. She's certain, Vision said politely but firmly. Thank you for your concern. On the bridge, Burnham was in communication with Admiral Vance. The conversation had been intense. Let me be clear, Captain, Vance's image on the view screen said, his tone walking the line between impressed and furious. You created a branch timeline, weaponized the mycelial network, collaborated with extradimensional beings who arrived through unauthorized means, violated multiple temporal accords, and restructured the fundamental nature of dilithium across the entire galaxy. Do I have that correct? Yes, sir. And in doing so, you eliminated the temporal entity that had been feeding on the Burns echoes, stabilized our dilithium network, and potentially prevented a multiversal extinction event. Also correct, sir. Vance was silent for a long moment. Captain Burnham, you're either the most brilliant officer in Starfleet or the most reckless. I haven't decided which. With respect, Admiral, can't I be both? A ghost of a smile crossed Vance's face. Stand by for commendation. And court-martial. We'll see which one processes first. Vance out. The screen went dark. Rayner chuckled from his station. Well, that went better than expected. He didn't actually threaten to have me thrown in the brig, so yes, I'd call that a win. Steve Rogers appeared on the bridge via transporter. He'd finally agreed to try it after watching Peter beam up and down a dozen times, and approached Burnham with his hand extended. Captain, on behalf of the Avengers, thank you. For trusting us. For working with us. For not treating us as the enemy when we arrived making threats. She shook his hand firmly. Captain Rogers, thank you for caring about a universe that isn't your own. Not everyone would have. That's what heroes do, Steve said simply. We help. Doesn't matter whose universe it is. Doctor Strange materialized through a portal, looking more exhausted than anyone had ever seen him. His usually immaculate robes were singed, and the eye of Agamotto had dimmed to almost nothing. The dimensional barriers have stabilized. The entity's retreat created healing rather than further damage. Whatever timeline we came from, our original reality, should be safe now. Should be? Burnham asked. Multiversal mechanics are complex. But I've examined the probability matrices. Our universe exists. Our Earth exists. Our timeline is intact. The entity's presence threatened to collapse dimensional boundaries, that threat is eliminated. Tony joined them on the bridge, having beamed aboard with Steve. His armor's arc reactor was barely glowing. So, we saved two universes. The one where the burn never happened, and this one where it did but can't feed temporal predators anymore. Not bad for a day's work. A day. Adira looked at the chronometer and laughed weakly. Captain, we've been in combat operations for 17 hours. 17 hours of preventing multiversal extinction, Chala said, arriving on the bridge with Black Panther's usual dignified bearing despite his suit being scorched and damaged. Wakanda has faced many threats, but few that operated on such scale. You have my deepest respect, Captain Burnham. And mine, Natasha added, appearing beside him. She'd changed out of her combat gear into something resembling a Federation uniform, though where she'd acquired it, nobody asked. This Federation of yours, this idea that exploration and diplomacy can work even after catastrophe, we could learn from that. We learn from you too, Burnham admitted. Watching the Avengers fight, the coordination, the trust, the willingness to sacrifice for each other. That's something we'd lost during the dark ages after the burn. You reminded us what it looks like when people truly work together. Hulk's voice boomed through the comm system from engineering. Hulk want food. Smashing makes Hulk hungry. Bruce Banner's more measured tone followed. What he means is, we've been running on adrenaline and gamma radiation for almost a day. Is there somewhere we could, rest? Eat? Preferably somewhere that can handle a potentially transforming physicist. Reno's voice joined the conversation. We've got a cargo bay big enough for the big guy if he shows up. And the replicators can make food for, well, whatever you all eat. Do gods eat? Do synthetics eat? I've got so many questions. Later, Burnham said, smiling despite her exhaustion. Right now, let's get everyone fed and rested. We've earned it. Discovery's mess hall had been converted into an impromptu gathering space. Federation crew mixed with Avengers in a scene that would have been impossible hours ago. Peter Parker was showing a group of young ensigns how his web shooters worked, firing samples that dissolved after a few minutes. Thor was engaged in what appeared to be an arm wrestling match with a Klingon officer, both of them grinning with warrior's joy despite the obvious mismatch. Wanda and Vision sat quietly in a corner, content to simply exist together after another close call. Carol Danvers was in deep conversation with Discovery's chief engineer about propulsion systems, comparing notes on warp drive versus photonic flight. And Steve Rogers sat with Captain Burnham, both of them nursing replicated coffee that tasted almost right. This Federation of yours, Steve said thoughtfully. It's built on principles. Exploration, diplomacy, cooperation. Not conquest or force. That's the ideal, Burnham confirmed. We don't always live up to it. Especially after the burn, we struggled to remember why those principles mattered. But we're rebuilding. We could use more of that in our world, Steve admitted. After Thanos, after the snap, we won, but we lost so much. Sometimes I wonder if we're still fighting old wars instead of building new peace. You saved half the universe. That's not nothing. No. But it's also not enough. Victory isn't the same as healing. He paused. Your Federation fell apart after the burn, but you're putting it back together. Not through force or fear, but by reminding people why they joined in the first place. That takes a different kind of courage. Burnham raised her coffee cup. To courage in all its forms. Steve clinked his cup against hers. Amen to that. Across the mess hall, Tony was sketching designs on a PADD, working with Stamets on theoretical improvements to the spore drive. If you added a quantum buffer here, and adjusted the harmonic frequency of the mycelial interface, we'd risk destabilizing the entire network, Stamets interrupted. Or we'd double the jump range and cut reaction time in half. That's actually not a terrible idea. But we'd need to run simulations for at least. I can have Jarvis run 10,000 simulations in the next hour. Want to see which design works best? Stamets grinned. Mr. Stark, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful collaboration. Please don't quote Casablanca at me. I already cried during Endgame. In the cargo bay, Bruce Banner sat with the Hulk. A controlled partial transformation that let him maintain intelligence while accessing the Hulk's strength. He was explaining quantum mechanics to a fascinated Adira, who asked questions that made even Bruce pause to think. So the Hulk's gamma radiation creates a quantum impossibility that propagates through dimensional barriers? Essentially. I shouldn't exist. Every time I transform, I'm violating conservation of energy, thermodynamics, and basic causality. But I do exist, so reality just adapts. That's beautiful, Adira breathed. In our universe, we spent centuries trying to understand the rules. But you're living proof that sometimes the most important discoveries come from breaking them. Or from radioactive spider bites, Peter added, joining their conversation. Or magic stones. Or super soldier serum. Or being a literal god. The Avengers are basically a collection of things that shouldn't work but do anyway. Sounds like Starfleet after the burn, Adira said. We shouldn't have survived. Statistically, the Federation should have collapsed completely. But we didn't. We adapted. Found new ways forward. That's what heroes do, Bruce said. We adapt. We survive. We help others survive. Whether it's one universe or multiple. Hours later, as Discovery's crew and the Avengers rested, Doctor Strange and Chala stood on the ship's observation deck, looking out at the stars of the 32nd century. This galaxy, Chala said quietly. It survived its apocalypse. Lost so much, but found the will to rebuild. Wakanda has faced similar moments. Times when everything seemed lost. We endured by remembering who we were. And who were you? Strange asked. Protectors. Innovators. A people who valued wisdom over warfare, but understood that sometimes war chooses you. Chala paused. The Federation reminds me of Wakanda's ideals. They're struggling, wounded, but still reaching for something better than mere survival. We could learn from that, Strange agreed. The Avengers have become very good at fighting. At stopping threats. But building? Creating lasting peace? That's harder. Then perhaps we bring that lesson home. Show Earth that heroism isn't just defeating villains, it's building something worth defending. Strange smiled slightly. King Chala, are you proposing the Avengers become diplomats? I'm proposing we become more than warriors. The Federation showed us what's possible when you refuse to let catastrophe define you. A noble goal. Let's hope we can achieve it. As the 32nd century's equivalent of dawn approached, though time and space was relative, the Avengers began preparing to depart. Doctor Strange had calculated the dimensional coordinates to return them to their universe, using the same mycelial network they'd weaponized to create a stable portal home. The crew of Discovery gathered to see them off. You're welcome back anytime, Burnham said, addressing all of them. Though preferably with less multiversal threats attached. We'll try, Tony promised. No guarantees though. Weird follows us around. Before we go, Steve said, I want to leave you something. He unstrapped his shield, the vibranium disc that had defended him through countless battles, and held it out to Burnham. This represents something. A promise that will always stand for what's right, even when it's hard. I think you understand that better than most. Captain Rogers, I can't. You can. And you should. Consider it a reminder that you're not alone out here. That somewhere, in another universe, there are people who believe in the same things you do. Burnham accepted the shield with reverence, understanding the weight of what she held. We'll keep it safe. Honor it. And remember what it represents. Thor stepped forward, holding Stormbreaker. I would offer my own weapon, but I find I am quite attached to this axe. Instead, I offer a promise. Should you ever need the might of Asgard, call out to the thunder, and I shall hear. How exactly would we? Reality is thinner between our universes now. Speak with conviction, and the cosmos will carry your words. Magic is belief made manifest. One by one, the Avengers said their farewells. Peter Parker gave Adira a USB drive containing Jarvis's complete database on dimensional mechanics, encrypted, but you're smart, you'll figure it out. Wanda and Vision promised to remember the Federation's ideals in their own battles. Natasha simply nodded with the kind of respect one warrior gives another. And then, with Strange's magic opening a shimmering portal that connected two realities, the Avengers prepared to leave. One more thing, Hulk said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Tell people what happened here. Tell them that universes fought together. That heroes don't stop at dimensional borders. That hope. He struggled for words. That hope is bigger than one reality. We will, Burnham promised. Live long and prosper, Avengers. Steve smiled at the phrase. I like that. What's the proper response? There isn't one. It's a wish, not a greeting. Then let me make one up. Steve raised his hand in something approximating a Vulcan salute. He didn't quite get the finger positioning right, but the intent was clear. Stay mighty, Federation. And thanks for the assist. The Avengers stepped through the portal. Strange went last, pausing just before crossing the threshold. Captain Burnham, one final observation. In all the timelines I examined, the ones where the Federation survived were the ones where people like you refused to give up. Keep being stubborn. The multiverse needs it. Then he was gone, and the portal closed, and the Avengers returned to their own reality, carrying stories of a galaxy that had faced apocalypse and chosen to rebuild, of a Federation that valued exploration over conquest, of heroes who proved that courage transcended dimensional boundaries. On Discovery, Burnham held Captain America's shield and looked at her crew. Well, she said. That happened. Captain, Rayner said, a slight smile on his face. For the record, this is the weirdest first contact in Federation history. Agreed. Let's make sure it stays that way. Helm, set course for Federation headquarters. We have a lot to report. Aye, Captain. As Discovery turned toward home, the 32nd century galaxy continued spinning, scarred by the burn but no longer haunted by it, protected from temporal predators, connected to other universes through bonds forged in battle and mutual respect. Somewhere in the quantum foam between dimensions, the entity fled to distant realities, wounded and starving, seeking sustenance elsewhere. It would recover eventually, beings like it always did. But not here, not now, not while the Federation and its impossible allies stood watch. And in another universe, in a different reality, the Avengers returned to their Earth carrying lessons learned from a galaxy that had faced its darkest moment and chosen light. Two universes, forever changed by a single impossible encounter. Two definitions of heroism, proving they were the same at their core. And infinite possibilities for what might come next. 3 weeks after the entity's defeat, the United Federation of Planets convened an emergency session at Federation headquarters. Representatives from dozens of worlds gathered, more than had assembled since before the burn. The topic, what to do about the extra-dimensional visitors who had saved their reality and then disappeared, leaving behind questions that challenged everything they thought they understood about the universe. Captain Michael Burnham stood before the assembly, Captain America's shield resting on a display stand beside her. She'd prepared a comprehensive report, complete with sensor logs, personal testimonies, and scientific analysis from the brightest minds in the Federation. But standing here, looking at the faces of people who'd survived 40 years of darkness, she realized data wasn't what they needed. They needed to understand what the Avengers had represented. Members of the Federation Council, she began, her voice carrying through the chamber. 3 weeks ago, warriors from another universe arrived in ours. They came through an unauthorized dimensional breach, made demands, and threatened to act unilaterally. By every protocol we've established, they should have been considered hostile invaders. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Admiral Vance watched from his position, his expression unreadable. But they weren't invaders, Burnham continued. They were protectors who saw a threat to the multiverse and responded the only way they knew how, with overwhelming force and unshakable determination. They didn't understand our ways. They didn't respect our protocols. They operated on principles that sometimes conflicted with our own. She paused, letting her words settle. And they saved us anyway. The chamber fell silent. The entity that fed on the burn's temporal echoes would have eventually consumed our entire reality. We know this now from the data Dr. Strange and his colleagues provided. It had been feeding for 40 years, growing stronger, preparing for a feast that would have left nothing behind. We were too close to see it. too focused on rebuilding what we'd lost to notice the Predator watching from dimensional shadows. Burnham gestured to the holographic display, showing the branched timeline where the burn had been prevented. The Avengers didn't just save our universe. They created another where the catastrophe never occurred. A timeline where the Federation never fell, where billions who died in our reality still live. They gave an entire universe a second chance. At what cost? A Tellarite representative challenged. Captain, your report indicates they violated temporal mechanics, weaponized the mycelial network, and created paradoxes we still don't fully understand. The long-term consequences. Are that we're alive? Burnham interrupted. That we're here, having this conversation, instead of being consumed by a temporal predator. Yes, there were risks. Yes, they broke our rules. But they did it to save lives, not just in our universe, but across infinite realities. A Vulcan counselor raised her hand. Captain Burnham, you've described these Avengers as operating with overwhelming force and unshakable determination. These qualities sound antithetical to Federation principles. How do you reconcile their methods with our values? It was a fair question. Burnham had wrestled with it herself over the past 3 weeks. I can't, she admitted. Not entirely. The Avengers operate under different principles. They believe in preemptive action, in using their power to stop threats before they fully materialize. That conflicts with the Prime Directive, with our commitment to non-interference, with our belief in diplomatic solutions. She picked up the shield from its display stand, feeling its weight. But they also believe in something we share, that with power comes responsibility. That when you have the ability to help, you have the obligation to try. That courage means standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Captain Rogers gave me this shield as a symbol of those shared values. And I think we need to remember that there are many ways to be heroic. Many paths to justice. Many forms of courage. Are you suggesting we abandon Federation principles? Another counselor asked sharply. No. I'm suggesting we recognize that our way isn't the only way. The Avengers saved us not despite their differences but because of them. They brought powers and perspectives we couldn't have imagined. Thor's mastery of cosmic forces. The Hulk's quantum impossibility. Scarlet Witch's reality manipulation. Doctor Strange's command of dimensional mechanics. These things don't exist in our understanding of the universe, and that's exactly why they worked. Burnham returned the shield to its stand. For 40 years, we've been rebuilding the Federation based on what we knew, what we'd always done. And we've accomplished incredible things, reconnected worlds, restored the dilithium network, brought hope back to a shattered galaxy. But the Avengers showed us something we'd forgotten. Sometimes the impossible is necessary. Sometimes you have to break the rules to save what matters. Sometimes courage means accepting help from those who don't share your methods but share your goals. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Admiral Vance stood. Captain Burnham's report raises questions that will take years to answer fully. Questions about dimensional boundaries, temporal mechanics, the nature of heroism, and our place in a multiverse we're only beginning to understand. He looked around the assembly. But here's what I know, when the Federation faced extinction, help came from an impossible source. And we were smart enough to accept it. He turned to Burnham. Captain, your actions during this crisis were unauthorized, reckless, and violated multiple regulations. They also saved countless lives and demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptive thinking we need in this new era. The commendation will be in your file. So will the reprimand. Try not to make a habit of either. Burnham allowed herself a slight smile. Admiral. Later, in Discovery's ready room, Burnham sat with her senior staff. The formal debriefing was over, but questions remained. So what happens now? Commander Rayner asked. Do we just go back to normal? Pretend we didn't save the multiverse with warriors from another dimension? "We document everything," Adira said, still poring over data from the encounter. "The dimensional breach mechanics, the temporal entities feeding patterns, the anti-temporal pulse propagation, this is revolutionary science. Papers that will take decades to fully unpack." "And we stay vigilant," Burnham added. Dr. Strange said the entity wasn't destroyed, just driven away. It could return. Or something else could come through. "The dimensional barriers are stable now, but we've proven they can be crossed. Are we ready for that?" Stamets asked. "For a multiverse where anything is possible. Where warriors with impossible powers can appear without warning. We'll have to be," Burnham said simply. "The universe, the multiverse, is bigger and stranger than we ever imagined. Our choice is whether we face that with fear or curiosity. I choose curiosity." "Very Starfleet of you, Captain," Rayner said with approval. A chime sounded at the door. "Come in." Reno entered, carrying something wrapped in cloth. "Captain, we finished analyzing the shield Captain Rogers left. The vibranium composite is unlike anything in our database. It absorbs kinetic energy at impossible efficiency, redistributes force through quantum-locked molecular bonds, and," she unwrapped the cloth, revealing the iconic star-spangled disk. "And it's basically indestructible. We tested it against phasers, disruptors, even antimatter. Nothing scratched it." "That's vibranium for you," Burnham said, remembering Chala's descriptions of Wakanda's miracle metal. "What's your recommendation?" "Keep it accessible but secure. If we ever face threats that require unconventional responses, having a weapon from another universe might be useful. Plus, it's a hell of a reminder." "Of what?" "That heroes exist in infinite forms. And sometimes they leave their weapons behind so we remember we're not alone." Across the galaxy, life continued. The Emerald Chain, weakened by the Federation's resurgence, retreated to lick its wounds. Independent worlds that had isolated after the burn began cautiously reaching out, inspired by stories of how Discovery and its impossible allies had faced extinction and won. The dilithium network expanded, connecting more systems every day. And in quiet moments, people looked up at the stars and wondered about the warriors who had come from beyond reality itself. On Nivar, Vulcan scientists analyzed sensor data, trying to reconcile magic and science, emotion and logic, the impossible becoming real. Their conclusions were frustratingly incomplete, but they agreed on one point: the universe was far more complex than even Surek's teachings had prepared them for. Infinite diversity and infinite combinations took on new meaning when those combinations included alternate dimensions. On the Klingon homeworld, warriors sang songs of Thor, a god who wielded lightning and faced death with joy. The story spread through warrior houses, becoming legend, the day QNOS witnessed true battle against an enemy that existed outside time itself. Klingon philosophy held that the greatest honor came from facing impossible odds. The Avengers had embodied that principle. On scattered colonies and outposts, children played games where they pretended to be Spider-Man or Captain Marvel or the Hulk, heroes from another reality who proved that courage transcended dimensional boundaries. Parents watched and wondered what kind of future they were building, where the impossible had become documented fact. And on Discovery, Captain Burnham kept Captain America's shield in her ready room, displayed with the same respect Federation officers showed the Constitution or the Prime Directive. Not as a weapon, though it could be used as one if needed, but as a reminder. A reminder that heroism wore infinite faces. That courage could come from unexpected sources. That sometimes the universe provided help in the strangest forms. And that when faced with extinction, the proper response wasn't fear or despair. It was to stand with whoever stood beside you and fight for what mattered. 6 months after the Avengers' departure, Discovery detected an unusual subspace message. Not Federation frequency. Not any known species. Just a simple transmission on a wavelength that shouldn't exist, carrying a message that made Burnham's heart skip. "Captain," Christopher reported from communications. We're receiving a signal from. I don't know where. The origin point exists outside normal spacetime. It's addressed to you specifically. On screen. The view screen flickered, and Tony Stark's face appeared, slightly distorted by dimensional interference but unmistakably him, that characteristic smirk in place. Hey, Captain. Tony Stark here, calling from Universe A, also known as home. Took us 6 months to figure out how to punch a communication signal through dimensional barriers without destabilizing both realities. Doctor Strange helped, though he complained the whole time about unnecessary risks and temporal paradoxes. Guy really needs to lighten up. Despite everything, Burnham found herself smiling. Anyway, Tony continued, wanted to give you an update. We made it home safe. Earth's still here, universe hasn't imploded, Avengers are back to our usual routine of fighting terrestrial threats instead of multiversal ones. It's almost boring. Almost. His expression grew more serious. But we wanted you to know, what we saw in your universe mattered. The way your Federation rebuilt after catastrophe, the way you held on to principles even when everything fell apart, the way you proved that cooperation beats conquest every time, we're trying to implement some of that here. Steve's been working with international governments to create better protocols for global threats. Challen's expanding Wakanda's outreach programs. Even Thor's talking to Asgardian refugees about building communities instead of kingdoms. Tony paused, as if considering his next words carefully. You taught us something, Captain Burnham. You and your Federation. You taught us that winning isn't the same as building. That defeating villains isn't the same as creating lasting peace. That sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons but with patience, diplomacy, and the courage to keep trying even when everything says you should give up. Another pause. So, thanks. For the lesson. For the partnership. For proving that heroism transcends dimensional boundaries. And hey, if you ever need the Avengers again, if some other multiversal threat shows up, you've got our number. Well, our dimensional frequency. Same difference. Tony's smirk returned. Stay mighty, Federation. And remember, somewhere out there in the infinite multiverse, Earth's mightiest heroes have your back. Stark out. The transmission ended. The view screen returned to showing normal space, stars moving past at warp speed as Discovery continued its mission. Burnham sat in her command chair, surrounded by her crew, and felt something she hadn't fully felt since before the burn, certainty. Certainty that the Federation would endure. That their principles mattered. That they weren't alone in an indifferent universe. Commander Rayner, she said. Log that transmission for Federation archives. Classification, Omega Protocol. Future generations should know what happened here. Captain. What should we title it? Burnham considered. The Avengers invasion that became an alliance. The warriors from beyond who saved their reality. The day the impossible proved real. Title it, First Contact, Multiversal Edition. Because something tells me this won't be the last time we encounter other realities. And when it happens again, I want Starfleet to remember, sometimes help comes from the strangest places. Our job is to be ready to accept it. Recorded, Captain. Discovery continued on its journey, carrying within it the memory of warriors who'd crossed dimensional barriers to stand against extinction. The Federation continued rebuilding, stronger for having been tested and found resilient. The galaxy continued healing, one connection at a time. And somewhere in the quantum foam between realities, dimensional barriers held stable. Scarred by the passage of heroes but stronger for it, proof that when universes collided, the result didn't have to be catastrophic. Sometimes, it could be salvation. Sometimes, it could be exactly what both worlds needed. And sometimes, the impossible alliance was the one that changed everything. The multiverse is infinite, containing realities where every possibility exists. In one such reality, the Federation never fell. In another, the Avengers never formed. In countless others, neither existed at all. But in this reality, in these two realities, connected by circumstance and courage, two definitions of heroism met and recognized each other as kindred spirits. Warriors who operated under different philosophies but shared the same fundamental truth, that with power came responsibility, and with responsibility came the obligation to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The Avengers returned to their universe changed by what they'd seen. A federation that had faced apocalypse and chosen rebuilding over revenge. A galaxy that valued exploration over conquest. A civilization that proved principles could survive catastrophe if people believed in them strongly enough. The Federation continued its journey changed by what they'd experienced. Warriors whose power defied comprehension but whose hearts beat with the same desire to protect. Heroes who didn't always follow protocols but always fought for what they believed was right. Proof that the universe, the multiverse, was stranger and more wondrous than even Starfleet's wildest explorations had suggested. Both universes were richer for the encounter. Both carried forward lessons learned when reality itself hung in the balance and the only path forward was together. Captain Michael Burnham kept Captain America's shield in her ready room for the rest of her career. When she eventually retired, she donated it to the Federation Museum with a single inscription, given in friendship by Captain Steve Rogers of Earth, Universe A. A reminder that heroism transcends all boundaries, and that courage is universal. The Avengers kept detailed records of the 32nd Century Federation, studying their principles of cooperation and exploration. When new threats arose, and they always did, the team found themselves asking a question that hadn't occurred to them before: what would the Federation do? Not always. Not in every situation. Sometimes overwhelming force was necessary. Sometimes preemptive action saved lives. But sometimes, the harder path of patience and diplomacy proved stronger than any weapon. And the Avengers, warriors all, learned to recognize the difference. Two universes, forever linked by the day Earth's mightiest heroes invaded a galaxy far from home and discovered that heroism wore infinite faces. That courage transcended dimensional barriers. That the multiverse, for all its strangeness and danger, could also be a source of hope. In the 32nd century, Discovery continued its mission of exploration and connection, carrying forward the legacy of cooperation that had saved their reality. In the 21st century, the Avengers continued their mission of protection and defense, carrying forward the lesson that winning wasn't the same as building. And somewhere in the quantum foam between dimensions, where reality itself was fluid and possibilities were infinite, the story became legend. The legend became myth. And the myth became a reminder that echoed across infinite universes. Sometimes, the greatest victories come not from conquest but from alliance. Not from overwhelming power but from the courage to accept help from unlikely sources. Not from fighting alone but from recognizing that in a multiverse of infinite possibilities, the possibility of friendship, of cooperation, of heroes standing together despite their differences, might be the most powerful force of all. The Avengers and the Federation. Warriors and explorers. Force and diplomacy. Two philosophies that should have clashed but instead found common ground in the universal truth that transcends all boundaries. When faced with extinction, heroes stand together. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. Live long and prosper. Hit the subscribe button for more interesting stories.